Hello guys, welcome to Super Harry. Today we have an incredible story for you. Hogwarts magic suddenly accepted Harry as headmaster and expelled Dumbledore instantly. If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, The castle decides. The morning started the way most disasters do, quietly, without warning, and with the smell of breakfast. Harry Potter was halfway down the marble staircase, still pulling his robe straight, when the castle shuddered. Not violently, not the way it had shuddered during the Triwizard Tournament or during the nights when Voldemort's presence had pressed against its wards like a hand against glass. This was something else entirely. Deeper. The kind of tremor that started in stone and ended in your chest, the way thunder does when it's directly overhead. He stopped walking. Around him, a dozen other students froze too, hands gripping banisters, faces tilted upward as though expecting the ceiling to fall. It didn't fall. Instead, every torch in the corridor blazed gold, not the usual amber-orange of enchanted flame but something richer, older, almost alive, and then the light settled, and the castle went perfectly, completely still. "What," said Ron Weasley from one step above him, "was that?" Harry had no answer. He looked at his hands, which felt strange, the way your hands feel after you've been gripping something too tightly and suddenly let go. A warmth was running up his arms, through his shoulders, into the base of his skull. Not painful. Not even uncomfortable. Just present. Like being recognized. Harry. Hermione was 3 steps below him, turned around, staring at him with an expression he knew well, that specific combination of concern and furious mental cataloging that meant she had already begun forming 17 different hypotheses. "Your eyes. What about them?" There, she stopped. They were glowing. Just for a second. Gold. Ron made a sound that was somewhere between impressed and alarmed. "That's either brilliant or really, really bad." Harry opened his mouth to say something perfectly reasonable like "I'm fine" or "it's probably nothing," and then the staircase moved. Not in its usual wandering, architectural whimsy sort of way. It moved with purpose, swinging toward a corridor Harry had never taken at this time of morning, angling itself firmly upward in a direction that led, unmistakably, toward the 7th floor. Toward the stone gargoyle that stood outside the headmaster's office. "It's pointing at you," Hermione said quietly. "The staircase is pointing at you." "Staircases don't point," Harry said. The staircase shifted pointedly beneath his feet. "That one does," Ron said. By the time they reached the 7th floor, there were at least 40 students behind them. Word traveled fast when the castle started doing things it had never done before, and what the castle was doing now was unprecedented in ways that made Hermione's voice go slightly higher than usual as she rapid-fired historical context that nobody was quite processing. The founders bound the castle's magic to a governance structure in 993 AD, she was saying, half jogging to keep up with Harry, who hadn't made a conscious decision to walk toward the gargoyle but whose feet were moving there anyway. "There are accounts, very old accounts, mostly in restricted sections, of the castle expressing preferences. Certain rooms appearing when needed, passages opening or closing. But a direct transfer of, Harry, you need to slow down, a direct transfer of headmaster authority has never been documented in any, Hermione." "Yes. Breathe." She breathed. Then immediately started again. "It has never been documented in any known historical record. Which means either this has never happened before, or it happened and whoever it happened to made sure nobody wrote it down," Harry said. She went quiet for a moment. "That's a very Dumbledore thing to say. I've been around him too long." The gargoyle was ahead. It was already moving aside. Harry had only ever seen it do that when someone had spoken the password, a rotating cast of sweet names that Dumbledore changed seasonally with what seemed like genuine delight. There was no password spoken now. The gargoyle simply stepped aside the way a door opens when it knows who you are, and the spiral staircase beyond began rotating before Harry had even reached the first step. He looked back at the crowd. Hermione was right behind him. Ron was right behind her. Behind them, an anxious mass of students ranging from wide-eyed first years to skeptical seventh years, and near the back, arms crossed, expression thunderous, silver hair catching the torchlight, Professor McGonagall was pushing through them with the kind of focused urgency that meant she already knew something. Harry turned back to the staircase, stepped on, and rode it up. The headmaster's office was exactly as he remembered it, the spindly silver instruments on their shelves, the portraits of former headmasters in their frames, the great desk of dark wood positioned to make whoever sat behind it feel like a mountain, and Fawkes's empty perch standing to one side, the phoenix gone since the end of last year, following his master into whatever complicated exile Dumbledore had chosen for himself in the aftermath of the Ministry battle. But three things were different. The first, the chair behind the desk had turned to face the door, as though it had been waiting. The second, the portraits. Every single portrait in the office, and there were dozens, climbing the curved walls in overlapping frames, was awake and leaning forward. Former headmasters and headmistresses who had slept through Harry's previous visits, who had been snoring or wandering between their various canvas homes when he'd stood in this office arguing with Dumbledore's twinkling patience, were all now alert, all watching the door with focused expressions. Some looked grave. Some looked curious. One elderly witch near the ceiling, dark-skinned, sharp-eyed, wearing robes Harry didn't recognize the era of, was smiling the way people smile when something they've waited a very long time for finally arrives. The third difference, there was no Dumbledore. McGonagall arrived at the top of the stairs 30 seconds after Harry, breathing harder than usual, and stopped when she saw the room. She stood very still. Then, in a voice from which she had stripped almost all emotion, the portraits woke. "Yes," said the elderly witch near the ceiling. McGonagall looked up at her. "Headmistress Hellywise." "Not headmistress any longer," Hellywise said pleasantly. "I haven't been for 400 years. But I remember what it felt like when the castle made its choice. I recognize the look." Her eyes moved to Harry. "It is exactly as overwhelming as it appears to be, young man. And exactly as real." Harry was standing in the middle of the office, not sitting, not pacing, just standing, and the warmth that had started in his hands on the staircase was everywhere now, running under his skin like a second heartbeat, and he was beginning to understand with a dizzying certainty that this was not something he was going to be able to walk away from. "Where's Dumbledore?" he asked. "Downstairs," McGonagall said tightly. "He attempted to enter this office approximately 4 minutes ago." The gargoyle did not move. "A beat. He tried the password?" Harry asked. "7 of them. He's been changing it seasonally for 30 years, Mr. Potter. He tried every one." She paused. The gargoyle remained stationary. Ron, who had come up the stairs quietly and was standing near the bookcase, let out a breath that might have been a laugh in different circumstances. "Ha! This isn't funny, Ronald," Hermione said from beside him. "Didn't say it was," Ron said. "But it also a little bit is." "The castle has made its decision," Hellywise said from her portrait, voice carrying with the easy authority of someone who had no political stake in the present and therefore no reason to soften anything. "It has been deliberating, in its way, for some time. Those of us who were paying attention could feel it, a kind of restlessness in the stones. A questioning. The castle asks itself, sometimes, whether it is being used for what it was built for." She tilted her head. "This year, it answered itself." "What does that mean in practical terms?" Hermione asked. She had produced a notebook from somewhere. Harry didn't know where she'd been keeping it, she was in her school robes. He suspected she just always had a notebook. "It means," Hellywise said, "that Hogwarts recognizes one headmaster. The wards respond to him. The castle's magic answers to him. The authority of this office, every protection, every privilege, every power this building holds, now belongs to him." She looked at Harry without ceremony. "You." The room was completely quiet. Then Harry said, "I'm 17. You were also 11 when you walked into a forest to die," Hellywise said without missing a beat. Age, the castle has decided, is not the relevant metric. Albus Dumbledore was in the corridor outside his former office, a phrase that would take most of the morning to settle into anything like reality, when Harry came back down the spiral stairs. He was standing with his hands clasped before him, wearing his travel robes as though he had just returned from somewhere, his half-moon spectacles perched on his nose, and his expression was the thing that struck Harry most. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who has been playing a very long game of chess and has just watched the board rearrange itself according to rules he had not written. Thoughtful. Calculating. And underneath both of those, something that might have been, if Harry was reading it correctly, a species of grief. Harry, he said. Just the name. No twinkling. No particular warmth. Professor, Harry said. Then, because the word sat strangely given what had just happened, Dumbledore. Behind Harry, students crowded the corridor, Hermione and Ron closest, then McGonagall at Harry's shoulder, then everyone else pressing in with varying degrees of subtlety. The gargoyle stood motionless beside the entrance to the staircase, facing Dumbledore with no particular expression, because gargoyles don't have expressions, but if they did, Harry thought, this one would have been calm and absolute. Dumbledore looked at the gargoyle. Then at Harry. I don't suppose, he said, with a very faint echo of his usual wry warmth, that you had any more advance notice of this than I did. About 30 seconds, Harry said. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. And how do you feel? Like I have a second heartbeat, Harry said, because there was no point in being anything but honest. And like the castle is paying attention to me. It is, Dumbledore said simply. It always has been, I suspect. More than it ever told me. He was looking at Harry with an expression Harry couldn't entirely read, too many layers moving through it at once. I have spent 50 years building a relationship with this castle, Harry. Learning its moods, its preferences, its extraordinary memory. And yet this morning it has demonstrated that I never fully understood it. A pause. That is perhaps the most important lesson it has ever taught me. What are you going to do? Harry asked. What am I going to do? Dumbledore repeated quietly, as though tasting the question. He looked down at his hands, both of them, the good one and the blackened one that was still slowly dying from the curse that had taken it. I am going to have breakfast, he said finally. And then I believe we need to talk. Not a student and his headmaster. Just two people, with a great deal to say to each other. He turned and walked down the corridor, the crowd parting for him the way crowds always parted for Dumbledore, the parting that was half respect and half something older and more instinctive than respect. He walked with the same measured dignity he always had. He did not look back. Harry watched him go. Beside him, McGonagall said very quietly, Mr. Potter. There are matters that will need your immediate attention. I know, Harry said. The staff will have questions. I know that too. And the students, I know. He turned to look at her. Professor McGonagall. Can you give me 10 minutes first? She studied him for a moment, that sharp, precise assessment she had been turning on students for 40 years, that look that stripped away posturing and saw the thing underneath. Whatever she saw, she gave a single nod. 10 minutes. Harry turned and went back up the stairs, and the gargoyle moved for him without hesitation, and the spiral staircase rose smoothly beneath his feet, and the office greeted him like a room that had been waiting to be inhabited properly for a very long time. He sat behind the desk. He hadn't planned to. He'd meant to stand, to look at the portraits, to ask Hellawise more questions. But when he walked past the chair it simply offered itself, somehow, and he sat, and the moment he did the desk shifted almost imperceptibly, and the instruments on the shelves hummed a single low note, and somewhere in the walls the castle sighed. Not metaphorically. The walls actually produced a slow, deep sound that might have been stones settling or might have been something much older than that. Harry put his hands flat on the desk and thought about what he knew. He knew this, the castle had chosen him, and that choice was not reversible, and it was not accidental. He had spent years believing that things happened to him, the scar, the prophecy, the tournament, the visions. Years of being positioned, moved, aimed. Dumbledore's game piece, the Order's symbol, the Ministry's scapegoat. Even last year, at the Department of Mysteries, it had been his grief and Voldemort's manipulation that had put him in motion, not his own decision. This was different. The castle had not moved him toward something because of a prophecy or a plan. It had looked at him and made a judgment, about who he was, what he valued, how he understood the difference between power and responsibility, and decided that of everyone in this building, he was the one it trusted. He was not going to waste that by being afraid of it. He pulled a piece of parchment toward him. He picked up a quill from the holder on the desk. The quill was Dumbledore's, expensive, perfectly balanced, but it settled in Harry's hand without fuss. He started writing. By 8 in the morning, with breakfast only half finished in the great hall below, Harry Potter had done 5 things that nobody at Hogwarts had expected before the week began. The first, he had sent owls, Hogwarts owls, which responded to the headmaster's request with brisk professional efficiency, to every member of staff, requesting a meeting in the staff room at 9 o'clock. Not requesting. Summoning. He had used exactly the phrasing Dumbledore had used in the 2 such notes Harry had personally seen, and he had signed them Harry Potter, Headmaster, and the act of writing that had felt like jumping off a cliff and discovering midway down that you knew how to fly. The second, he had walked through the 7th floor corridor with intent, following the warmth that moved through him like a navigational instinct, and found that the room of requirement responded to him differently now, not as a hidden room that appeared when asked, but as a space that was actively curated, one that opened when he thought of it and showed him exactly what he needed without requiring him to specify. What it showed him that morning was a long room full of shelves, and on the shelves were files, and the files were labeled with names and dates going back centuries, and he had looked at them for 30 seconds before understanding what they were and deciding that particular conversation would wait. The third, he had eaten breakfast. This sounds minor. It was not minor. He had come down to the great hall at 7:30, walked to the staff table without hesitation, and sat in the central chair that had been Dumbledore's chair. The hall had gone nearly silent. Harry had helped himself to eggs and toast, caught Ron's eye across the room, and received a look of such unalloyed delighted solidarity that something in his chest had unknotted. He had eaten his breakfast, and when students had begun approaching, timidly, then less timidly, with questions, he had answered them honestly. Yes, it really happened. No, I don't know all the details yet. Yes, it's real. No, classes aren't cancelled. That last one had produced the most noise. The fourth, he had had a 10-minute conversation with Peeves, which had ended with Peeves agreeing not to disrupt the morning on the condition that Harry referred to him, once, in front of witnesses, as Peeves the Indispensable. Harry had done it without blinking. Peeves had floated away looking more genuinely pleased than Harry had ever seen him look, and the morning poltergeist chaos had not materialized. The fifth, he had found Professor Snape. Snape had been in the dungeons. He was always in the dungeons at this hour, moving between his private stores and his classroom with the particular purposeful glide that was his version of a morning routine. Harry had gone down the stone steps without announcement, crossed through the cold corridor that smelled of damp and old magic and about 24 preserving potions, and knocked on the door of Snape's private laboratory. There was a pause. Then, with the precise intonation of a man who had been quietly furious for the last 40 minutes, enter. Harry entered. Snape was at his workbench, doing something precise and careful with a knife and a root Harry didn't recognize. He did not look up. The laboratory was full of the focused quiet of genuine work, and Harry stood just inside the door and waited. "I expected you to come in with the others," Snape said, still not looking up. "The herd of curious students your friends have no doubt been collecting all morning. I wanted to talk to you separately." "Did you?" The knife moved. "And what, precisely, does the new headmaster wish to discuss?" "I want you to stay," Harry said. The knife stopped. Snape looked up. His expression was exactly what Harry expected, controlled, carefully blank, with something sharp and coiled underneath it. "I beg your pardon. I want you to stay on as potions master," Harry said. "I also want you to continue your other work. Whatever it is you're doing that Dumbledore asked you to do. I'm not going to pretend I know all of it. But I know enough to know that you're useful and that Hogwarts needs you here." He paused. "And I'm asking you to do it for the school, not for Dumbledore. Not because you're following orders. Because you're choosing to." Snape stared at him for a long, measuring moment. His expression had done something complicated, moved through several things very quickly and settled on something that was not quite neutrality. "You are 17 years old," Snape said. "People keep saying that. Because it is relevant." "Is it?" Harry asked. "The castle doesn't seem to think so. And in my experience, the castle has better judgment than most of the people in it." Snape looked at him for another long moment. Then he picked up his knife and returned to the root. "I will be at your staff meeting," he said, which was not yes and was not no and was, from Severus Snape, practically a declaration of loyalty. Harry turned to leave. "Potter." He stopped. "You should know," Snape said, his voice careful, "that Dumbledore has already sent 2 owls this morning. One to the Ministry. One to someone I am not at liberty to name. Whatever he told you about having breakfast and talking, he is already moving." The knife made a precise cut. "He is not your enemy. But he is also not standing still." "I know," Harry said. "Do you?" "Yes," Harry said. "But neither am I." The staff meeting at 9 o'clock began with 11 people in the room and ended with 12, because Dumbledore arrived 7 minutes in, knocked on the staff room door with perfect courtesy, and waited. Harry was at the head of the table. McGonagall was to his left. Hermione and Ron were not in the room. This was a staff meeting, and Harry had drawn that line cleanly, though both of them had received copies of his agenda in advance because Harry had never been under any illusion about running his inner circle. The staff had arranged themselves with varying levels of comfort, Flitwick in his usual chair, looking attentive and carefully neutral, Sprout with her hands folded, watching Harry with the expression of someone reserving judgment, Trelawney at the far end of the table, for once not making a prediction, just watching, and Snape against the wall, arms crossed, giving nothing away. When the knock came, Harry looked at the door. Everyone else looked at Harry. "Come in," he said. Dumbledore entered. He had changed from his travel robes into his usual spectacularly colored ones, deep violet this morning, with tiny silver crescent moons that moved across the fabric, and he carried himself with the same undiminished presence he always did. But the chair at the head of the table, which would normally have been his by 15 years of habit, was occupied. And he did not attempt to take it. He found an empty chair near the wall, sat in it with the quiet ease of a man who has sat in worse chairs in worse circumstances, and looked at Harry with calm attention. The room held its breath. Harry let it breathe out. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "I'll be quick, because there are classes this morning and I'd rather not disrupt the students' routine more than this day already has." He looked around the table. "I know this morning has been strange. I know most of you have questions. I'll answer what I can, and what I can't answer I'll be honest about. But first, does anyone want to argue about whether this is real?" Silence. "Right," Harry said. "Then let's talk about how we keep this school running." He laid it out simply. The wards were intact, he could feel them, all of them, layered through the castle like rings in old wood, and the feeling was something like knowing which roads are open in a city you've always lived in. The protections that Dumbledore had maintained were still in place, the castle had transferred authority without withdrawing protection. Classes would continue as scheduled. The daily operation of Hogwarts, he said, was not going to change because of what had happened this morning, because Hogwarts was a school, and the students deserved their education regardless of what was happening in the political layer above them. "There will be external pressure," he said. "From the Ministry. Possibly soon." He glanced at Dumbledore. "Probably soon. Probably this afternoon," Dumbledore said mildly. He was looking at the table rather than at Harry, his tone carrying no particular edge. I expect an owl from Cornelius within the hour, if it hasn't already arrived. Has it? Harry asked. I believe it arrived at 7:42, said the portrait of Phineas Nigellus Black, who was present in the frame hanging near the staff-room door and who had been silent until now, in the particular manner of someone saving their entry for maximum impact. The owl came to the headmaster's office. I watched it turn around and leave because there was no one there to receive it. It'll come to me next, Harry said. Good. Good? Professor Sprout asked. Because I'd rather the ministry come to me directly than find another way in, Harry said. I can deal with a letter. Or a visit. What I can't deal with as effectively is something working around me. He caught a few nods, Flitwick's small, quick one, McGonagall's almost imperceptible agreement. I'm also going to need all of you to work with me, not for me. I'm not, he stopped, chose his words. I know this isn't normal. I know I'm 17. I know several of you have been teaching longer than I've been alive. I'm not going to pretend I know more about education than you do. But the castle chose me, and I'm not going to dishonor that by being timid about it. From the wall, Snape made a sound that was almost inaudible. It might have been approval. So, Harry said. Questions. Sprout went first, as he'd expected. She was the most practically minded. She wanted to know about the wards in the greenhouses, which were maintained by the headmaster's magic and which she had been worrying about since 6 in the morning. Harry told her he'd checked them on the way in. They were strong. She relaxed by about 40%. Flitwick asked about the enchantments governing the Great Hall ceiling, a personal project of his that he maintained under the headmaster's oversight. Harry told him the maintenance permissions were still intact. Flitwick's tiny hands folded together, satisfied. Trelawney said, in a dreamy voice, that she had foreseen this in November of Harry's 3rd year and had been waiting patiently. Harry thanked her politely and did not comment. Then Dumbledore said, quietly, from his chair near the wall, I would like to speak to you privately, Harry. When the meeting ends. I know, Harry said. I'll come find you. The office, Dumbledore began. I'll come find you, Harry repeated, steady, no edge to it, just the simple fact of who the office belonged to now. Something moved through Dumbledore's expression. He nodded once, slowly. After the meeting, Harry stood at the window of the headmaster's office and looked out over the grounds. The lake was flat and grey-green, the late August sky moving with early clouds, the distant tree-line of the forbidden forest still and dark. The castle spread below him in every direction and he could feel it, not just the wards but everything, every room, every corridor, every hidden space and trick stair and forgotten chamber. Not as a map but as a presence, vast and patient, pressing gently against his awareness the way the warmth of a fireplace presses against your back when you're reading in the cold. He thought about what Snape had said. He is already moving. He thought about Dumbledore's owls, and about the ministry owl circling the tower right now because it hadn't been able to deliver its message to the expected recipient. He thought about how the world worked, about how the people at the top of any structure, the moment that structure changed beneath them, didn't stand still and watch. They moved. They adjusted. They looked for the lever. He was going to have to be faster. Hermione appeared at the top of the spiral stairs, slightly breathless, notebook in hand. Ron was right behind her, carrying what appeared to be a very large plate of toast. The ministry owl landed, Hermione said without preamble. It tried the office first, then went to the Great Hall, and then it just gave up and found Harry's window. It's sitting outside. She pointed. Harry turned. There was indeed a ministry owl on the outer windowsill, grey, official-looking, with a red wax seal on the parchment it carried and the particular affronted dignity of a bird that has had a more complicated morning than it bargained for. Harry opened the window. The owl thrust the letter at him and ruffled its feathers. He broke the seal and read. Dear Mr. Potter, it has come to the Ministry's attention that irregularities of a significant nature have occurred at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry this morning. The Ministry of Magic wishes to assure all parties that the standing governance structure of Hogwarts, as established by the Board of Governors and recognized under the Education Act of 1901, remains in force, and that any— Harry stopped reading. He handed the letter to Hermione. She read it in about 6 seconds, which was approximately how long it took anyone with Hermione's reading speed to absorb a paragraph of bureaucratic noise. Her expression went through a series of controlled shifts. "They're saying the governance change isn't legally valid," she said. "I know. They're saying Dumbledore's authority as headmaster is recognized under standing law and that— I know," Harry said again. "Harry, this is actually complicated," she said, and her voice had dropped into the precise, urgent register it took on when she was genuinely worried. "The Ministry has real authority here. Fudge could appoint an Umbridge situation again, let him try," Harry said, and his voice came out flat and utterly calm. Not angry. Not blustering. Just certain in a way that made Ron go still and Hermione blink. Harry went to the desk, sat down, took a fresh sheet of parchment, and picked up the quill. "What are you writing?" Ron asked, around a piece of toast. "A response," Harry said. "To the Ministry?" "Yes." He wrote for 3 minutes. Then he held the letter out to Hermione. She read it. Her eyes moved quickly, then stopped, then moved again. Then she lowered the letter and looked at Harry with an expression that was equal parts alarmed and deeply, almost reluctantly impressed. "You can't send this," she said. "Already folded," he said. He took it back, folded it, sealed it with the headmaster's seal, which had, without him searching for it, presented itself on the desk in front of him that morning, as though it had been waiting, and gave it to the Ministry owl. The owl took it, looked at him, and left. "What did it say?" Ron asked. "It said," Harry said, leaning back in the headmaster's chair in the headmaster's office with the castle warm and certain at his back, "that the governance of Hogwarts has changed. That the castle's magic is the highest authority on who leads it. That I am the headmaster. And that if the Ministry has a problem with that, they're welcome to come and say so in person." Ron stared at him. "You invited the Ministry to come argue with you? In your castle?" "Yes." Ron broke into a wide, slightly disbelieving grin. "Brilliant," he said. "That is absolutely brilliant." From her portrait near the ceiling, Helewise of the old robes was smiling again. The kind of smile that belongs to someone watching history being made by someone who has no idea that's what they're doing. Harry didn't see it. He was already thinking about what came next. Chapter 2, The Weight of Every Room. The Ministry's response came at noon. Not a letter this time. A delegation. Harry was in the middle of his first official act as a working headmaster, sitting across from a very nervous second-year Hufflepuff named Tobias Finch who had somehow, in the chaos of the morning, managed to accidentally transfigure his own shoes into a pair of small aggressive badgers, when McGonagall knocked on the office door with the particular sharpness that meant external problem, immediate attention. "Send him to Madame Pomfrey," Harry told the boy, nodding at his feet, where the badgers were circling his ankles with low threatening energy. "Tell her I sent you. She'll sort it." Tobias Finch stared at him. You're really the headmaster?" "Apparently," Harry said. "Go." The boy went, hurting one of his shoes toward the door with the desperate optimism of someone who had not yet accepted that the shoe was now a badger. Harry watched him go with something that was not quite amusement and not quite fondness but was somewhere in the vicinity of both, and then he stood up and opened the door. McGonagall's face told him everything before she said a word. 3 Ministry officials, she said. 2 from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and 1 from the Office of Wizarding Education. They arrived through the Hogsmeade gates 10 minutes ago. They have a writ." "What kind of writ?" "The kind," she said, "that is meant to restore Albus Dumbledore to his position and remove you from this office." Harry said nothing for a moment. The castle hummed, that low, deep note, the sound of stone paying attention. He could feel it processing the presence of the officials the way you feel a draft and know before seeing it where the window is open. "Where are they?" he asked. "The entrance hall. They asked for the headmaster's office. I told them the headmaster would come to them." She paused. "I hope that was correct." "It was perfect," Harry said. "Let's go." The three officials were standing in the entrance hall with the stiff collective posture of people who expected resistance and had prepared speeches for it. The tallest of them, a broad man with a gray beard and the deep blue robes of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, was holding a scroll that had the ministry seal stamped on it 3 times, which Harry had learned was a bureaucratic way of saying this is extremely serious, please be intimidated. The other 2 flanked him, one younger man who kept looking at the ceiling with poorly concealed unease and a sharp-faced woman with the particular tight smile of someone from wizarding education who had been trained never to look directly confrontational and instead to imply confrontation. Harry came down the stairs alone. He had not brought Hermione and Ron, not because he didn't want them there but because this was the kind of conversation that required a specific geometry, and showing up with your friends at your shoulder was a defensive posture. Harry wasn't feeling defensive. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs, close enough for normal conversation, far enough that they had to look at him clearly. "Good morning," he said. "I'm Harry Potter. I understand you have a writ." The tall one, he introduced himself as Senior Enforcement Officer Rook, unrolled the scroll with the practiced authority of someone who had done this before and expected it to work. "Mr. Potter. By authority of the Ministry of Magic, Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and in accordance with the Education Act of 1901, this writ orders the immediate restoration of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore to the position of Headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and the removal of unauthorized personnel from." "Unauthorized," Harry said. Rook stopped. "I beg your pardon." "You said unauthorized personnel," Harry said. "I want to make sure I understand your position. You're saying the castle's magic is unauthorized?" "The castle's magic," the sharp-faced woman from education said smoothly, "is not a recognized governance mechanism under the Education Act." "Interesting," Harry said, in exactly the tone of someone who does not find it interesting so much as revealing. "So when the castle's magic protects every student in this building, when the wards hold against dark creatures, when the enchantments prevent unauthorized apparition, when the defensive magic has kept this school standing for 1,000 years, that magic is recognized and valued. But when the same magic makes a governance decision, it's suddenly not a recognized mechanism." The younger official's eyes came down from the ceiling. Rook's jaw had set. "Mr. Potter, you can call me Headmaster," Harry said, not harshly, just levelly, "the way you state a fact." A beat. The entrance hall was very quiet. Somewhere above them, a staircase shifted. "The writ," Rook said, recovering, "is a legal instrument, then challenge it legally," Harry said. "Take the castle's decision to the Wizengamot. Argue that a 1,000-year-old magical institution's autonomous governance authority is superseded by an act from 1901. See what the Wizengamot says." He met Rook's eyes without blinking. "I'll wait." The 3 officials exchanged a look. It was quick, trained diplomats, all of them, but Harry caught it. They had not expected this specific response. They had expected either capitulation or explosive resistance. A 17-year-old calmly suggesting they make their case to the highest court of wizarding law was not on their script. In the meantime, Harry continued, "You're welcome to stay for lunch. Hogwarts extends hospitality to all visitors. Professor McGonagall will arrange rooms if you need them." He looked at Rook specifically. "But you should know that no writ executed by the Ministry of Magic has ever altered the castle's choice of headmaster. Not once. In 1,000 years. And writs don't change old magic. They just generate paperwork." He turned and walked back up the stairs. Behind him, he heard Rook mutter something low to the sharp-faced woman. He heard her murmur back. Then, and this was the thing that confirmed he had played the morning correctly, he heard the sound of the scroll being re-rolled. Hermione was in the library, which was where Hermione went when she needed to solve something fast and was willing to spend structural damage amounts of energy doing it. 3 tables were occupied by her research. She had color-coded her notes, which meant she had been at it for at least 2 hours, possibly since 6 in the morning. Harry sat down across from her. "What have you found?" "More than I expected," she said, which from Hermione meant she had found something genuinely significant and was still processing the implications. She turned her notes toward him. "The Education Act of 1901 is real and the Ministry can absolutely cite it. But there's older law. Much older. There's a charter document, the Hogwarts Foundation Charter, dated 993 AD, and it has precedence over the Act. Not technically supersedes, because nobody in 1901 apparently thought to check whether there was pre-existing constitutional magic in place, but in any competent legal argument, Hermione. The charter says that the governance of Hogwarts belongs to the castle itself," she said. "That the founders bound the school not to any external government but to its own magic. Any governance authority external bodies claim is secondary, not primary. The castle's choice comes first." Harry looked at her notes. The handwriting was precise even under pressure. "Where did you find this?" "Restricted section." "Well," she hesitated. "It was technically in the restricted section. But the door opened when I approached it this morning, which I've been interpreting as the castle helping." "The castle helped you," Harry said. "The castle helped me," she confirmed, and she looked equal parts gratified and slightly unnerved by this. "Harry, this is actually important. If Fudge pushes this to the Wizengamot, I told Rook to take it to the Wizengamot," Harry said. She stared at him. You told them to go to the Wizengamot?" "Seemed like the quickest way to put the charter on record," he said. She stared at him for another 2 seconds, then made a sound that was half exasperation and half something that was working very hard not to be admiration. "That's actually, fine. Fine. That's quite clever." She pulled another sheaf of notes toward her. "There's something else. I'm listening. I found references, in very old texts, in a language that I think is a protoform of magical Latin, to what happened this morning. Not to you, specifically, but to the event. The castle making a choice. It's happened twice before. Once in 1347 and once in 1612. She met his eyes. Both times the chosen headmaster fundamentally changed the school. Improved its protections, expanded its reach, redefined what it was for. She paused. Neither time was the choice made because the existing headmaster was incompetent or evil. Both times it was made because the castle judged that the moment required someone specific. Someone whose understanding of what the school was matched what the school needed to be. Harry sat with that for a moment. "And Dumbledore." "And Dumbledore," she agreed quietly. "He's not wrong about a lot of things, Harry. He's brilliant and he's powerful and he's protected this school in ways we might never fully understand. But the castle, I think the castle sees something. In what he's willing to sacrifice. In who he's willing to sacrifice. And in you. In what you've never been willing to do." Harry looked out the library window. The grounds were quiet, the 3 ministry officials presumably eating whatever had been put in front of them in the Great Hall and recalibrating their strategy. "He's already moving," Harry said. "Snape told me." "He sent an owl to someone outside Hogwarts," Hermione said. "I heard it from Phineas Nigellus. The portrait won't say who." "He doesn't need to," Harry said. He thought about the players, the ministry already in motion, Dumbledore's external connections, whatever leverage existed in the wizarding world that could be brought to bear on a school that had just made an inconvenient autonomous decision. Then he thought about the file room the castle had shown him that morning, the shelves of labeled records going back centuries. "There's something in the castle I need to show you." "What kind of something?" "The kind I need your brain to help me understand," he said. She closed her notebook with the decisive snap of someone who has just been given a more interesting problem. "Lead the way." The room of requirement appeared as it had that morning, long, quiet, suffused with a light that came from nowhere obvious, the shelves arranged with the orderly patience of a room that had been curated across centuries. Harry stood at the entrance and let the warmth in his chest orient him, and then he walked in and the room arranged itself around his presence, files moving slightly on their shelves the way compass needles move toward north. Hermione walked in behind him and went immediately quiet, which was always a sign that something had impressed her. "These are records," she said after a moment. "Yes. The castle's records." She moved to the nearest shelf, looked at a file label, moved to the next, then the next. Her pace increased. "Harry, this is documentation of every significant decision made in this school's governance since." She pulled a file, opened it, read. Her eyes moved very quickly. "Since the founders. This is a complete governance record. Decisions, justifications, outcomes. Letters. Internal correspondence." She turned to look at him. "Dumbledore's decisions are in here." "I know. All of them?" "I think so," Harry said. "The ones about the students, at least." She held the file she was reading very carefully, the way you hold something that has become heavy. "Harry. This has letters about you." "I figured." She looked at him for a long moment, reading his face in the way she sometimes did when she was checking not what he thought but how he was. "Do you want to know?" Harry thought about that honestly. He thought about what it would feel like to read the record of Dumbledore's thinking, the real thinking, not the carefully measured truths offered across the desk in that circular office, but the documented truth of someone reasoning their way through decisions about a boy's entire life. He thought about how much of himself had been moved around in the service of a plan he'd never consented to. "Not yet," he said. "There are things I need to know more urgently first." She nodded and didn't push, which was one of the things Harry valued most about Hermione. She always respected the pace at which other people needed to arrive at things. "Look for anything about the protections on the school," he said. "Anything about vulnerabilities. And anything about the ministry's historical relationship with Hogwarts governance." She was already pulling files. "I'll need Ron. I'll get him." Ron was, predictably, in the middle of a game of exploding snap with Neville and Dean, which he abandoned without visible regret the moment Harry appeared in the common room doorway. Dean looked mildly offended. Neville just looked at Harry with the steady, quiet attention he'd had all year, that undemonstrative loyalty that sat in his posture rather than his expression. "Need help?" Neville asked. Harry hesitated. Then he said, "Yeah. Actually. Come too." Neville stood up immediately. The four of them made their way up through the castle, and on the way Harry explained, briefly, what was in the room of requirement, and Ron's expression moved from curious to serious in about 30 seconds, and Neville listened without interruption and said, when Harry finished, "The castle knew you'd need those records." "What do you mean?" Harry asked. "The room gives you what you need," Neville said, as though this was obvious. "You needed those records. So it opened them for you." He paused. "It's been giving students what they needed for years. It gave us a place to practice. It just does it more explicitly for you now, I think." Harry looked at him. Neville was looking at the corridor ahead with the expression he'd had since his parents, that certain, level-weighted awareness of consequences that sat on him unlike most people their age. "You think like the castle," Harry said, not quite meaning to say it out loud. Neville blinked. "I just pay attention," he said. They were 3 hours into the room of requirement when Dumbledore found them. Not through the room itself, the room did not admit people uninvited, and Dumbledore did not attempt to enter. He knocked on the wall outside, which was not possible in any conventional architectural sense but which the castle apparently allowed, because there was a distinct sound of knuckles on stone and then Dumbledore's voice, measured and clear, "Harry. Might I speak with you?" Harry looked at Hermione, who had 6 files open in front of her and a slightly wild expression. Ron was cross-referencing 2 documents side by side with the focused intensity of a chess player. Neville was sitting quietly against the far wall reading a governance record from 1800 with careful attention. "Keep going," Harry told them. He stepped out. Dumbledore was in the corridor, standing without performance, no grandfatherly warmth deployed, no particular gravity. Just an old man in violet robes with a dying hand and a very complicated expression. "Thank you," he said. "What did you want to say?" Harry asked. "Several things." Dumbledore looked at the wall through which the room existed. "You found the archive?" "Yes. I knew it existed," Dumbledore said. "I never found the room. I believe it was waiting for someone who would use it differently." He paused. "What I mean is, I would have used those records as a tool of governance. As information to be managed." He looked at Harry. "I don't think that's how you're going to use them." "No," Harry agreed. "You're going to use them to understand what happened," Dumbledore said. "What decisions were made and why, and at what cost." He said it without defensiveness, which was harder to deal with than defensiveness would have been. "Yes," Harry said. "I want you to know," Dumbledore said, carefully, "that I did not send my owl this morning to undermine you." "Who did you send it to?" A pause. "Aberforth." Harry had not expected that. "His brother." "Why?" "Because I needed someone to tell who would not immediately involve the Ministry or the Order," Dumbledore said. "Because he is the one person who will tell me plainly whether I am behaving like a fool, and I wanted to know that before I did anything else." He looked down at his hands, both of them, the ruined and the whole. "He told me I was." Harry was quiet for a moment. "What did you actually want to do?" he asked. "This morning. When you first understood what had happened." Dumbledore said nothing for several seconds. When he spoke, his voice had shed its careful management. "I wanted," he said, "to argue. To demonstrate that the castle must have made an error. That there were factors it had not accounted for, dangers it did not fully understand, contingencies." He stopped. "And then I remembered something that Helewise said to me once, through her portrait, during a very different crisis. She said that the castle has never made a choice based on convenience or political necessity. She said the castle chooses based on something she described as rightness. The correct thing, not the expedient one." Harry waited. "And I thought about what I have spent 30 years doing in the name of the greater good," Dumbledore said, "and I thought about the choices I have made that were expedient but perhaps not right, and the castle has been watching all of it, every decision, every calculation, and I thought, perhaps it is not an error." The corridor was very quiet. Stone and old magic and the weight of honesty. "I need you to understand something," Harry said. "I'm not trying to punish you. That's not what this is." "I know," Dumbledore said. "I'm not going to exile you from the school. You're welcome here. As a teacher, as an advisor, as whatever you want to be." Harry met his eyes. "But I need you to work with me, not around me. If you're already moving, if you're already writing letters and making plans, then I need to know what they are. Not because I need your permission for things. But because if we're both moving in different directions, we'll collide, and that helps no one." Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. Harry could feel him genuinely considering it, not performing consideration, but actually doing the work of reorienting. It was a strange thing to watch in Dumbledore, who had always seemed to Harry to exist slightly outside the processes of real-time human reckoning. As though he had done all his considering decades in advance and was merely living out decisions already made. "You are asking me to be honest with you," Dumbledore said finally. "I'm asking you to be honest with yourself first," Harry said. "The rest will follow." Something shifted in Dumbledore's expression. Not quite broken. More like a lock that has been turned after a very long time of being closed. "I will try," he said. "You have my word." Harry nodded. "Tonight," he said. "Come to the office tonight. And we'll actually talk." The rest of the afternoon moved the way days do when everything is in motion, too fast and strangely slow at the same time. Harry attended 2 classes, not as a student but not quite as an authority either, moving through them as something new. In defense against the dark arts, the substitute professor, Dumbledore had been teaching it himself since Umbridge, looked at Harry when he came in and said, visibly disconcerted, "Are you auditing this class?" "Just watching," Harry said. He sat at the back. The substitute taught. The students kept glancing at him. He watched the lesson and at the end told the substitute, calmly and specifically, 3 things he could improve in his approach, and walked out. In the corridor, Draco Malfoy was waiting. This was not accidental. Malfoy had the look of someone who had been standing in that spot for a calculated amount of time, not long enough to look like he'd been waiting, but long enough to guarantee the encounter. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, silver blonde and precise, wearing an expression Harry recognized as his "I'm not asking for anything" expression that he always deployed when he was asking for something. "Malfoy," Harry said, not slowing down. "Potter," Malfoy said, falling into step beside him, which took some visible effort given that he'd started from a leaning position. "So. Headmaster. That's what they tell me. The ministry officials in the Great Hall are on their second meal," Malfoy said. "Rook's been writing letters for the last 2 hours. The education woman has interviewed 4 students." Harry glanced at him. "How do you know that?" "Because I pay attention," Malfoy said, in a tone that made it completely unclear whether he was being contemptuous or offering intelligence. "My father sent an owl this morning. Very short note. Basically said, assess the situation, report back." He paused. "I'm telling you that my father sent an owl because I think you should know what's being set in motion, and I think," he stopped walking. Harry stopped too. Malfoy was looking at the floor with an expression that was doing something complicated in the region of his jaw. "I think I don't want to be reporting back to my father. I think I want to, another stop. Figure out which side I'm on. Properly." Harry looked at him. Not with hostility. Not with warmth either. With the honest assessment of someone who had known this person for 6 years and understood exactly which parts of him were performance and which parts were real. "That's a different conversation than the one we've been having for 6 years, he said. "I know," Malfoy said, and there was no drawl in it, no performance, just a flat acknowledgement that hit differently for the absence of armor. "You can have that conversation," Harry said. "But not now. Tonight there's a lot happening. Come tomorrow morning." "You're not going to," Malfoy began. "I'm not going to anything," Harry said. "I said tomorrow. I meant it." He started walking again. "And Malfoy, tell me one useful thing about what the education woman asked the students." A pause. "Then Malfoy, from behind him, she asked whether they felt safe with you in charge. Every one of them she interviewed said yes. She wrote it down very quickly, like she wanted to get past it." Harry kept walking. "Good," he said. By 7 in the evening the ministry officials had requested, through McGonagall, a formal meeting with Harry tomorrow. Harry had sent back a note agreeing to 9 o'clock and specifying that the meeting would take place in the headmaster's office, and that the meeting was for the purpose of information exchange only, no decisions would be made under ministry pressure. The note was polite and specific and left no interpretive room whatsoever. McGonagall had delivered the note and come back with the report that Rook had read it twice and then set it down very carefully on the table and said nothing for 30 seconds. "I think," McGonagall told Harry, in a tone she was trying to keep strictly professional, "that you are proving rather more difficult to manage than they anticipated." "Were they anticipating easy?" Harry asked. "I believe," she said, "they anticipated emotional. Impulsive. Possibly tearful." She paused. "You have been none of these things." "I'm saving the emotional for later," Harry said, and she made a sound that was, unmistakably, a laugh, though it was gone so quickly that Harry was prepared to believe he'd imagined it. "There's one more thing," she said, her tone shifting back to precise neutrality. Dumbledore has asked whether he might resume teaching his Transfiguration elective for 7th years. His formal class. Just the teaching. Nothing administrative. Harry considered. The teaching had always been the part of Dumbledore that was unqualified, his genuine passion for the craft, the way he taught not just technique but understanding, the extraordinary way he could make a subject feel like a gift being given rather than a subject being delivered. Removing that from the school would be punitive for the wrong people. Yes, Harry said. Tell him yes. McGonagall looked at him for a moment. That is generous, she said. It's practical, Harry said. The students need him in that context. He needs to still be here in a real way. And I'm not going to hollow out the school to prove a point. He met her eyes. I'm not Umbridge. No, she said quietly. You are very much not. Dumbledore came to the office at 9. Harry was behind the desk when he arrived, not by design but because that was where he'd been working, going through the maintenance records the castle had generated for him, understanding the layers of protection woven into the building, getting familiar with the 1,000 small pieces of governance that kept Hogwarts functioning. The desk was covered in parchment. One of the silver instruments was making a soft sound in the corner because Harry had accidentally activated it an hour ago and hadn't yet figured out how to turn it off. Dumbledore sat down in the chair across the desk, the visitor's chair, without any apparent difficulty in the reversal of their usual positions. He folded his hands in his lap and looked at Harry with the clear, uncurated attention of someone who had decided to drop a great deal of weight. Before we begin, Dumbledore said, I want to tell you something I should have said years ago. Harry waited. I have used you, Dumbledore said. Plainly. No softening. Not exclusively or without care, but I have used you. I have made decisions about your life with the confidence of someone who believed he understood the full picture, and I have been wrong, not in the facts, perhaps, but in the assuming of a right I never had. The right to make those decisions for you. He paused. The castle sees that. I believe that is part of why it made its choice. Harry looked at him for a long time. The silver instrument hummed. Outside the window the grounds had gone dark and the stars were thick. I know, Harry said. I've known for a while. He leaned forward slightly. What I need to know now is what you set in motion with the ministry. All of it. And what you're prepared to do from here. Dumbledore told him. He was thorough and honest in a way he had not always been, and it took the better part of an hour, and by the end Harry had a clearer picture of the landscape than he'd had since morning. It wasn't as bad as it could have been. But it was not good. The ministry wasn't just sending officials. They were preparing a formal education order, an emergency instrument that, if signed by the minister, could temporarily supersede the school charter on national security grounds. Fudge had used this mechanism twice before, both times in contexts that were questionable enough that the Wizengamot had overturned them, but the process took time and in the interim the order would have force. When? Harry asked. The order needs the minister's signature and the endorsement of 3 senior Wizengamot members, Dumbledore said. My estimate is 2 to 4 days. And Umbridge, Harry said. It wasn't quite a question. Dumbledore's expression told him he was right. Dolores has been lobbying Cornelius for a return to active education oversight since the end of last year. She views what happened this morning as an opportunity. She has Cornelius's ear. Does she have the Wizengamot members? Harry asked. Not yet, Dumbledore said. But she is persuasive in the particular way of people who have no doubt whatsoever that they are right. Harry nodded slowly. Okay, he said. He looked out the window at the dark grounds, at the tree lane where the forbidden forest sat in its permanent ancient patience, at the lake which held a faint silver reflection of the moon. The castle was warm around him, present and certain, and he could feel it, all of it, the wards, the corridors, the students sleeping in their dormitories, 700 young people wrapped in the school's protection like a hand wrapped around something it refused to drop. I need to move faster than Umbridge does, Harry said. Which means tomorrow's meeting with Rook has to go a specific way. He looked at Dumbledore. I want your help. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. You are asking me to help you fight the ministry that I effectively notified this morning, he said. You notified Aberforth, Harry said. The ministry moved on its own. That's the distinction I'm making. He held Dumbledore's gaze. And yes. I'm asking for your help. Not because I need you to take over. But because you know things I don't, and I'm not too proud to use what's available. Something shifted in Dumbledore's face. It was very brief and very genuine, and it looked like relief, the specific, unexpected relief of someone who has been braced for punishment and received something entirely different. Tell me what you need, he said. Harry pulled a fresh sheet of parchment toward him. The castle settled around the office with the quiet of something resolved. Outside, an owl crossed the moon, heading somewhere with a message, and the night moved on, and somewhere in the building Hermione was still reading, and Ron was probably asleep over his notes, and the 3 ministry officials were in their guest rooms recalibrating their approach, and Dolores Umbridge, in her London office, was picking up a quill. And Harry Potter, 17 years old and 2 days into the strangest tenure any headmaster had ever begun, was learning the shape of the battle coming for him. He didn't look afraid. He looked ready. Chapter 3, Dolores arrived. She came on a Tuesday. Harry knew she was coming before the owls did, before Rook's awkward Tuesday morning face confirmed it, before the ministry carriage rolled through the Hogsmeade gates with its official burgundy trim and gold ministry seals catching the thin September light. He knew because the castle told him, not in words, not in any language, but in the specific way a building that has spent 1,000 years learning threat recognition communicates it. The wards tightened. The torches in the entrance hall burned fractionally brighter. The stone beneath his feet, when he walked the 7th-floor corridor at 6 in the morning, had a quality to it like a held breath. He paused at the window at the end of the corridor and looked down at the gates. The carriage was still a half-mile out, moving at the deliberate pace of official transport that wants to be seen arriving. 2 horses, ministry dark, moving through early mist. Behind the carriage, a second, smaller vehicle, not ministry standard, privately commissioned, which meant Umbridge had come on her own initiative and budget rather than as a purely ministry operation. She was here as herself, not just as an instrument. That mattered. Harry turned from the window. Phineas. The portrait of Phineas Nigellus Black, which had appeared in a small frame near the 7th-floor corridor window sometime yesterday and which Harry had chosen to interpret as the castle's opinion on convenient communication, looked at him with the expression of a man who had been waiting to be useful and was determined not to show how much. Headmaster. Tell the other portraits she's here. I want to know the moment she sets foot inside the building. Phineas smiled thinly. With pleasure, he said, and stepped sideways out of his frame. Harry was in the great hall at breakfast, at the staff table, eating toast and going through the parchment Hermione had delivered at dawn, her summary of the charter law, organized into a brief that even someone with no legal training could follow, which was what she'd specifically designed it for, when Ron dropped into the seat beside him with a plate stacked impractically high and said, without preamble, "She's really coming." "She's already here," Harry said, not looking up from the brief. "Merlin." Ron ate for a moment. "Are you nervous?" "No." Ron looked at him with the frank appraisal of someone who had shared a dormitory with Harry for 6 years and knew exactly what nervous looked like on his face. "You're not nervous," he confirmed, sounding faintly impressed. "How are you not nervous?" "She put a quill through your hand." "I know." Harry turned a page. "That's why I'm not nervous. I already know exactly what she is. There's nothing she can surprise me with." Famous last words, Ron said, but he said it without real concern, the way he said most things, like someone who had made the assessment, found it acceptable, and moved on. Hermione arrived 30 seconds later, sat down, looked at the brief in Harry's hand, and said, "You've read it." 3 times, Harry said. "You buried the strongest argument in the 4th paragraph." She looked at the parchment. "The charter predates, lead with it," he said. In any conversation, in any meeting. Lead with the oldest law first. She paused. You're right, she said, and took the brief back, produced a quill from her robe, and made a note in the margin without apparently finding anything unusual about revising her own work at 7 in the morning because someone had spotted a structural flaw. This was one of Hermione's genuinely extraordinary qualities. She cared about being right more than she cared about having been right the first time. She's going to try to use the students against you, Hermione said, writing. She did it before. Educational decrees framed as student welfare. She'll tell the ministry she's here to protect the students from an inexperienced unauthorized headmaster. I know, Harry said. So the students need to be visible. Not as pawns, as evidence. What Hogwarts looks like under your leadership should speak for itself. Harry looked out over the hall. 700 students eating breakfast, the usual morning noise of a school waking up, arguments over quills, someone laughing too loudly at the Gryffindor table, a third year at Hufflepuff constructing an elaborate tower out of toast that was definitely going to fall. The house tables were full. The ceiling showed clouds moving fast across a pale sky. It already does, he said. She came through the entrance hall doors at 8:30, and Harry was there. Not because he'd positioned himself strategically in the geographic sense, though that was not incidental, but because the entrance hall was where Hogwarts began, and if Dolores Umbridge was going to announce herself to this school, Harry intended to be the first thing she saw when she did. He was standing at the bottom of the stairs, hands in his robe pockets, alone. Behind him, the staircase rose through the castle in its usual shifting, purposeful way. The entrance to the Great Hall was to his left. The doors ahead were pushing open. She hadn't changed. That was the first thing, she was exactly as he remembered, which felt like something the universe should not have allowed. Short, wide, dressed in a cardigan of pink so assertive it constituted a statement, hair set in that rigid curl, and her face arranged in the smile that wasn't a smile so much as an architectural feature, decorative, structural, and in service of a weight-bearing function that had nothing to do with warmth. She stopped when she saw him. Behind her, Rook and the two officials from yesterday came through the door, and then two people Harry didn't recognize, aides, from the look of them, and then, last, a man in a tailored robe who was wearing the seal of the Board of Governors. The Board of Governors. Harry noted that immediately. She had brought a governor. Harry, Umbridge said. Her voice was exactly as he remembered too, soft and high and terrifyingly controlled. How lovely. Headmaster, Harry said pleasantly. A beat. The smile stayed absolutely in place. Of course, she said. You must be so overwhelmed. Not particularly, Harry said. Welcome to Hogwarts, Professor Umbridge. I'll remind you that you are here as a ministry visitor, not as a member of staff. If you'd like to be shown to a meeting room, I was hoping, she said, stepping forward with the particular momentum of a woman who has never in her life acknowledged a conversational boundary, to have a brief tour. Reacquaint myself with the school. I do so love Hogwarts. It feels rather like coming home. I'm sure it does, Harry said, and he didn't move. The meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock. It's 8:25. The meeting room will be ready at 9. Until then, you and your delegation are welcome in the Great Hall. She looked at him. The smile processed something. I was also hoping to have a word with Albus, she said. As a professional courtesy. Professor Dumbledore's schedule is his own to manage, Harry said. You're welcome to send him a note through the school owl post. He's still here. The man with the Board of Governors seal stepped forward. He was tall, in his 50s, with the expression of someone who has been powerful for long enough that he stopped remembering it's not inherent. Dumbledore is still residing at Hogwarts? Yes, Harry said. He's on staff. He teaches a Transfiguration elective. Under whose authority was that arrangement made? Mine, Harry said. The man looked at him the way grown men sometimes looked at Harry, with the specific incredulity of someone who keeps expecting the premise to turn out to be a joke. "I'm Cassius Warrington," he said. "Board of Governors." "I know," Harry said. "Your son was in Slytherin. Quidditch player." Warrington blinked. "Yes. Hogwarts takes good care of its alumni," Harry said. "Might want to keep that in mind." He turned slightly. "Professor McGonagall will take you to the Great Hall. I'll see you all at 9. McGonagall was at his shoulder, had been there for approximately 30 seconds. Harry would later learn she'd appeared at the top of the stairs the moment the doors opened and had walked down with the quiet precision of someone who intends to be precisely where needed and nowhere else. She stepped forward and said, "If you'll follow me," with the tone that had been sending students down corridors for 40 years and was in no way less effective on ministry officials. Umbridge was looking at Harry. The smile had not moved, but something behind it had. Something had recalibrated. "I do look forward to our meeting," she said softly. 9 o'clock, Harry said. She turned and followed McGonagall. The delegation followed her. The board governor went last, and he looked back at Harry once with an expression that was not quite hostile and not quite impressed but was something in between, a look that suggested he had come with assumptions and was already revising them. The entrance hall doors closed. Harry stood alone in the entrance hall for exactly 5 seconds. Then he said, to the empty air, "Phineas. Tell Hermione to come to the headmaster's office now." From the frame of a portrait on the entrance hall wall, a small watercolor landscape that Harry had never really looked at before, Phineas Nigellus Black appeared briefly between 2 painted trees. "Already there," he said. "She arrived 12 minutes ago. She's been reorganizing your bookshelves." Harry went upstairs. Hermione had not reorganized the bookshelves so much as she had created a supplementary filing system on the side table, which was an important distinction she made the moment Harry walked in. "I haven't touched the shelves," she clarified, gesturing. "I just added a reference system for the legal documents so they're accessible quickly. Cross-reference by precedent date." She looked at his face. "She's here." "She's here," he confirmed. "The governor?" "Warrington." Hermione made a sound of recognition. "Cassius Warrington. He was one of the 12 who originally petitioned for Dumbledore's removal 2 years ago. He signed the petition but ultimately backed down when the other 11 withdrew. He's politically ambitious and personally cautious, which means he's dangerous when he's been convinced something is safe." She turned to her notes. "Umbridge has convinced him this is safe. I need to unconvince him," Harry said. "Before 9. "You have," she checked the clock. 20 minutes. Harry thought. The fire in the office grate burned steadily. The portraits were listening. He could feel the slight shift in attention the way you feel when a room of people that was pretending not to watch suddenly can't stop. Helewise was awake in her frame near the ceiling, hands folded, saying nothing. "What does Warrington want?" Harry asked. "Status," Hermione said immediately. "Protection of his family's standing. He has 2 children in Hogwarts, his son graduated, yes, but his daughter is a 4th year. He wants the school to be safe and well-governed, not because he particularly cares about the students in the abstract but because his daughter is here and political uncertainty makes him nervous." She paused. "But there's something else. He's had a conflict with the ministry for the last year over a business license, something to do with imports of regulated magical materials. The ministry has been slow-walking his application. There are people who think Fudge is using it as leverage." Harry looked at her. "How do you know that?" "I read the Prophet's financial section," she said simply. "Most people don't bother." Harry nodded slowly. "So he's here partly because Umbridge has his arm, and partly because he wants to be on the right side of whatever happens next, and he's not certain yet which side that is." He went to the desk, sat down, and pulled a sheet of parchment toward him. He wrote 6 lines, folded the parchment, and handed it to Hermione. "Find him before the meeting. Give him that." She looked at the note. Her eyebrows rose. "You're moving fast." "I have to move before she does," Harry said. "She's spent 30 years building the skills to navigate meetings and writs and official processes. I have 20 minutes and a head start on what Warrington actually needs." He met her eyes. "Go." She went. The meeting room Harry chose was not the formal one McGonagall had suggested, the paneled room near the staff corridor, long table, ministry-appropriate gravity. He used the room adjacent to the headmaster's office instead, smaller, round table, large window overlooking the grounds, bookshelves on 2 walls, a fire burning. A room that felt like a conversation rather than a hearing. This was not an accident. He was there at 8:50, standing at the window when they came in, and he turned to greet them the way a person turns from something they were actually doing rather than the way a person turns who has been performing casualness. The distinction was visible and intended. Umbridge took in the room. Something flickered behind her eyes. She had expected the formal room, had calibrated for it, and then she arranged herself at the table with the smooth recovery of a professional, folding her hands on its surface, pink cardigan and all. Rook sat to her right. The governor sat to her left, which Harry noted. Warrington had chosen his position relative to Umbridge rather than relative to the table's neutral axis, which meant Hermione's note had not yet moved him to independence but had introduced doubt. Harry sat down. No preamble. "Let's be straightforward," he said. "What specifically is the ministry's concern?" The directness landed. Rook had a speech prepared, Harry could see it in the slight adjustment of his posture, and had lost the opening for it. "The ministry's concern," Rook said, recovering, "is the legality and stability of the current governance arrangement." "The castle's choice is legal," Harry said. "The Charter of 993 AD establishes the castle's autonomous governance authority as primary. The 1901 Education Act operates within that framework, not above it. If the ministry believes otherwise, the Wisengamot is the correct venue." He turned to Warrington. "Mr. Warrington. The Board of Governors derives its oversight authority from the same charter. You know this." Warrington looked at him with the expression of someone who has been handed an inconvenient fact. "I do," he said carefully. "So the board's legitimate concern is not whether the castle's choice is valid," Harry said. "It's whether this school is being well run. Whether the students are safe and properly educated. Whether the institution functions." He held Warrington's eyes. "Those are fair questions and I welcome them. That is your actual remit." A beat. Umbridge opened her mouth. "I've prepared a summary of the first 72 hours, Harry said, sliding parchments across the table, one to Rook, one to Warrington, none to Umbridge, which was precise and intentional. Every class was held on schedule. The protective wards are at full strength, stronger, actually, than the last recorded audit in June, because the castle has been reinforcing them since the transition. Student welfare is unchanged. There have been no incidents." He paused. "The school works." "A 72-hour period," Umbridge said, her soft voice threading neatly between Rook and Warrington, "is hardly sufficient to assess, then assess over a longer period," Harry said. "Come back in a month. Inspect. Talk to students, to staff, to parents. The school will be exactly the same." He looked at her directly. Not with hostility. Not with performance. Just with the flat certainty of someone who is not afraid of scrutiny because they have nothing to hide. "I welcome oversight, Professor Umbridge. I've nothing to hide and neither does this school. What I won't accept is an emergency order based on 72 hours of political panic." The word landed, political panic, and Warrington's expression moved. "Harry," Umbridge said, abandoning Headmaster with the deliberate precision of someone drawing a blade, "I understand this is all very exciting. A remarkable thing has happened and you are feeling very powerful. But there are thousands of students in this building whose welfare depends on stable, experienced, sit-in on a class," Harry said. "Today. Any class. Assess the teaching, the environment, the students' engagement. Do it properly. He waited. I'm giving you open access because I have nothing to hide. Can the ministry say the same about every oversight decision it's made in the last 3 years? Rook went carefully still. Warrington looked at the summary in his hands. Umbridge's smile had not moved. But her eyes had. They were doing the rapid, subtle assessment of someone recalibrating strategy in real time, and what Harry saw in them was not the anger he expected and not the condescension he remembered but something more interesting, a genuine reconsideration. She was looking at him and seeing not what she had expected to find, and for the first time, a thread of something that might have been concern about her own position moved beneath her absolute surface certainty. Good, Harry thought. Good. I'll take you up on that, she said pleasantly. I'll sit in on a class this afternoon. Wonderful, Harry said. Professor Snape's Advanced Potions. 2 o'clock. The look on Snape's face when Harry told him was extraordinary. It was controlled. Snape's face was always controlled, but it moved through 3 distinct stages before settling. First, cold irritation, then a very brief, almost invisible flicker of understanding, then something that might have been dark satisfaction if you caught it at exactly the right angle. You are sending Dolores Umbridge, Snape said, to my classroom. At 2 o'clock, Harry confirmed. To observe. Yes. Snape was quiet for a moment. You're aware, he said, that Umbridge once attempted to have me reviewed under the educational decrees. That she filed a formal assessment report containing the phrase, regrettably unorthodox, no fewer than 7 times. I'm aware, Harry said. That's why I picked your class. Snape's chin tilted upward by a fraction of an inch. She will attempt to interfere. She'll attempt to inspect, Harry said. There's a difference. You don't have to let her make one. Teach the lesson you'd have taught without her. Let the class speak for itself. He paused. And Severus, Snape's eyes sharpened at the name. Don't hold back, Harry said. A pause that lasted precisely long enough to be eloquent. I never do, Snape said, and returned to his workbench. At 2 o'clock Harry stood in the corridor outside Snape's classroom and listened. The 7th-year Advanced Potions class was, by any honest measure, one of the finest pieces of teaching Harry had witnessed in 6 years at Hogwarts. Snape was in his element in a way that was uncomfortable to observe directly, like looking at something sharp and bright, moving through the room with his usual precise intensity, but with something loosened in it today, something that was not performance but pure engagement. He talked about the draft of living death not as a recipe to be followed but as a philosophical problem in alchemical theory, and the 12 students in the room leaned forward in the way students do when a subject has suddenly become 3-dimensional. Umbridge sat at the back with her clipboard and her pink cardigan and wrote things down with the focused attention of someone looking for problems. She asked no questions. She made no sound. She wrote constantly. Harry watched her through the small glass panel in the classroom door. He was not hiding. If she turned around she would see him, but he was very still, reading the room rather than its people. 3/4 of the way through the lesson, Umbridge raised her hand. The classroom went quiet with the specific quality of a room holding its breath. Snape turned from the board. He looked at her hand with the expression he reserved for things he considered structurally inferior to the world around them. Yes, he said. I simply wanted to ask, Umbridge said, with the smile that never altered, whether the students are required to produce working samples today, or whether this is a theoretical lesson only. A beat. Both, Snape said. The theory informs the practice. Students who understand why will execute more precisely than students who have merely been shown how. His eyes moved over the class. Demonstrate. Every student in the room picked up their wand or their stirring rod with the focused confidence of people who had been given, in the preceding 45 minutes, not just instruction but comprehension. The room filled with the sound of work. Umbridge wrote something on her clipboard. She underlined it. Harry stepped back from the window and went back upstairs. At 4 o'clock, Ron found Harry on the astronomy tower. Harry had gone up there not for any strategic reason but because the castle had been busy all day, every room full of purpose and people and consequence, and he needed 20 minutes of sky. He was leaning on the parapet, watching the grounds, when Ron came up the stairs with 2 cups of tea he had apparently acquired from somewhere and the expression of someone who has something to report. He handed Harry a cup. Sat beside him. Looked out at the grounds for a moment. "Malfoy came this morning," Ron said. "I know. I saw him. He's in a weird state," Ron said. Not bad weird. Just. He looks like someone who's been carrying something for a long time and has just realized they don't have to." He drank his tea. "He told me his father old 3 times yesterday. He didn't write back." Harry said nothing. "I'm not saying trust him," Ron said. "I'm not saying anything, really. I'm just telling you." "What did you say to him?" Harry asked. Ron was quiet for a moment. "I told him that this year was different. That the rules were different. That if he wanted to be different, this was the time to do it, but that nobody was going to let him keep 1 foot on each side." He looked at Harry. "Was that right?" "Yes," Harry said. Ron nodded, satisfied. He drank his tea. Below them the grounds were busy with students released for afternoon free time, small figures moving across the grass, the Quidditch pitch standing empty and golden in the late afternoon light. "She's going to write a bad report," Ron said. "I know. And the report goes to Fudge, who will sign the emergency education order, and then she comes back with actual authority." He paused. "How worried should I be?" Harry looked out at the grounds. "She's counting on the emergency order being enough," he said. "She thinks if she has the legal mechanism, the castle will have to comply. That the magic will bend to institutional authority." "Will it?" Ron asked. "No," Harry said. "The castle is older than the ministry. It's older than the law she's citing. It doesn't bend to emergency orders. So she can't actually take control. She can make everything complicated," Harry said. "She can create enough noise and legal chaos that the order works to disorient the staff, confuse the students' families, pressure the school from the outside. She doesn't need to physically control the castle. She just needs to make it ungovernable." He looked at Ron. "That's the plan. I'm fairly sure of it." Ron was quiet for a moment. "So what do we do?" Harry turned the teacup in his hands. Down on the grounds, a group of third years had started a throwing game with a quaffle they had absolutely no permission to be using outside of scheduled Quidditch practice, and nobody was stopping them because there was no reason to stop something that was causing no harm and creating pure joy, and this was the thing, this small, ordinary, alive thing on the grass below, that Harry had been holding in mind all day as the thing he was protecting. "We make it ungovernable for her," Harry said. "Before she can do it to us." Dinner was the usual organized chaos of 700 people eating, and Harry was at the staff table when Umbridge's aide found him and placed a folded note beside his plate with the smooth efficiency of someone trained to be invisible. Harry picked it up, read it, set it down. Ron, across from him, "What does it say?" "She wants a private word," Harry said. "After dinner. Just the 2 of us." McGonagall, 4 seats down, had heard. She looked at Harry with controlled alarm. "I'll see her," Harry said, to the alarm. "In the entrance hall. Not a private room. The entrance hall." McGonagall considered, then nodded. She was waiting for him when he came down the stairs after dinner, the great hall emptying behind him, students drifting up to dormitories and common rooms and the library. The entrance hall torches were burning their evening gold and Umbridge stood beneath them in her pink cardigan, clipboard gone, no ministry officials visible. She looked smaller without the delegation. She did not look less dangerous. "Harry," she said. "Headmaster," Harry said, reaching the bottom of the stairs and stopping there, 1 step up, which put their eye levels nearly equal. "What did you want to discuss?" "I want to have an honest conversation," she said. The smile was gone. What replaced it was something surprisingly direct, not warmth, not pretense, but a kind of focused sincerity that Harry had not expected from her. It was, he realized, actually more alarming than the smile. I want you to understand that I don't think you're a bad person, Harry. I think you've been put in an impossible position by magic that is very old and very beyond anyone's full comprehension. Go on, Harry said. This school needs someone who can interface with the ministry, with the board, with parents, with the wider wizarding world. It needs someone whose authority is recognized across institutions. Not just within its walls. She folded her hands. You are 17. In 1 year you will leave this school. What happens then? The castle made a choice, but the castle did not consider the practical consequences for the institution. Harry listened to all of it. He had expected an argument from power and gotten an argument from practicality, which was genuinely more sophisticated than he'd anticipated, and he took a moment to acknowledge that before he answered. You're right, he said. Those are real concerns. Something in her expression adjusted slightly, surprised by the agreement. But you're wrong about the castle not considering them, Harry said. The castle has been doing this for 1,000 years. It has chosen headmasters twice before who were young, unconventional, and outside the normal governance structure. Both times the school improved. Both times the concerns you're raising now were raised by the ministry equivalents of the time. And both times the concerns turned out to be about institutional control, not student welfare. He held her eyes. You're not worried about the students, Professor Umbridge. You're worried about what happens to the ministry's authority over Hogwarts if this stands. She was quiet. Because if the castle's choice holds, Harry said, it sets a precedent. It says the school can make its own governance decisions independently of the ministry. It says the 1901 Act has limits. And every overcautious, controlling, student-harming directive the ministry has tried to impose on this school over the last decade becomes legally questionable. He tilted his head slightly. That's what the emergency order is actually about. Not me. Not my age or my qualifications. The precedent. The entrance hall was very quiet. The torches burned their steady gold. Umbridge looked at him for a long time. The directness she had used was still there, she was still genuinely engaging rather than performing, and Harry could see her working through the fact that she had come prepared for several kinds of opponent and had found a different one. You're very sure of yourself, she said softly. I'm sure of the school, Harry said. That's not the same thing. She looked at him for another moment. Then, with the precise deliberateness of someone choosing their next move over a chessboard, the report goes to Minister Fudge tomorrow. I know, Harry said. And the order will be signed within 48 hours. Perhaps, Harry said. What will you do? Harry stepped down from the last stair until he was at floor level, and the height difference resolved. I'm going to do what the castle has been doing for 1,000 years, he said. I'm going to protect the people inside these walls. Through whatever comes. He paused. But I want you to know something, Professor. She waited. You don't have to be the instrument they're using you as, Harry said, and he said it without cruelty, without performance, because it was what he actually thought. The ministry is pointing you at this school because they think you'll do what they tell you without asking whether it's right. And maybe that's been true before. He held her gaze. But you came here tonight without your delegation and without your clipboard and you spoke to me directly. That means something. He paused. Think about what it means. He turned and went back up the stairs. Behind him, in the entrance hall, he heard nothing for a long time. Then the soft sound of measured footsteps on stone, heading toward the guest corridor. At the top of the stairs, Phineas Nigellus Black appeared briefly in a portrait frame. Well played, he said, with the tone of someone who had not expected to be impressed and was irritated about it. Harry kept walking. At 11 that night the castle was quiet and the headmaster's office held only Harry, the crackling fire, and the patient watching presence of dozens of sleeping portrait frames, when the warmth in his chest shifted, subtle, distinct, like a compass needle moving. He stood up and went to the window. The grounds were dark. The lake held its silver reflection of the moon. The forbidden forest was patient and permanent at the edges of everything. But on the path between the gates and the castle, moving alone in the moonlight, was a figure he recognized by her deliberate walk and the folder of parchment under her arm. Umbridge was walking toward the gates. Alone. No aid. Going out rather than staying. She stopped on the path, stood for a moment facing the castle, and then she looked up. Harry didn't move from the window. The distance was too great to see each other's faces clearly, but he thought, was almost certain, that she looked directly at the headmaster's office window for a long moment. Then she turned and continued to the gates. Harry watched until she was gone. He did not know what it meant. He did not know if she was going to file the report or hesitate or do something else entirely, and he was honest enough with himself to admit that his read of her tonight might have been wrong, that the directness might have been tactical rather than genuine. But the castle was calm. Its wards did not shift or tighten. The building simply stood in its own ancient certainty, torches burning low through the night hours, holding its students like a careful hand, and Harry Potter stood at its highest occupied window and felt the weight of every room beneath him, 700 lives, all those years of learning and growing and becoming, held inside these stones, and thought, whatever comes tomorrow, this is worth it. He went back to the desk. Picked up the quill. Started writing. Chapter 4, The archive beneath the report went to Fudge at dawn. Harry knew the moment it left the school, not because any owl alerted him or because Phineas appeared in a frame with dramatic news, but because the castle told him in the way it always told him things, in the language of pressure and sensation that lived below conscious thought. A loosening, like a not giving way. Something had passed beyond the wards. Something with weight to it. He was already dressed. He had barely slept, and he had stopped pretending otherwise around 2 in the morning, choosing instead to sit at the desk reading through governance documents by firelight until his eyes adjusted to the particular quality of exhausted clarity that made long documents almost manageable. He had drunk 3 cups of tea that had gone cold before he remembered them, and the fire had burned down twice, and by the time the grey light of early morning came through the window he had read enough to understand that what was coming at Hogwarts was not just political but structural. Umbridge's report, whatever it contained, was not the weapon. It was the delivery mechanism for one. He stood, stretched, and looked out the window at the grounds. The emergency education order, if Fudge signed it within 48 hours as Umbridge had said, would grant the ministry temporary custodial authority over Hogwarts. Not permanent. Not absolute. But enough to appoint an oversight governor with veto power over headmaster decisions, freeze the school's autonomous ward management, and mandate compliance with ministry educational directives. Hermione had explained all of this last night with the controlled urgency of someone delivering a diagnosis, and what she had not said but what had been visible in the angle of her jaw was that the order, in practical terms, meant Umbridge back in this building with actual power. Harry needed something that moved faster than the ministry's bureaucratic timeline. He needed something that made the emergency order legally untenable before it was signed, not after. He needed the archive. He went down to the room of requirement at 6:30, before breakfast, before the corridors filled. The castle was quiet at this hour in the particular way of large old buildings that hold sleeping people, a quality of suspended breath, of accumulated rest. His footsteps on the stone were the only sound in the 7th-floor corridor. The room opened for him the way it always did now, immediately, without ritual, the wall simply offering its entrance as though it had been mid-thought about him already. Inside, the shelves stood in their long rows under their sourceless light, patient and complete, and the warmth in his chest orientated him without being asked. He went to the section he hadn't gone to yet. The one he had looked at the first morning and then deliberately walked away from. The section labeled with his own name. The files here were thicker than he expected. Not dozens, hundreds. Parchments, letters, notes in handwriting he recognized and handwriting he didn't. Documents with official seals, documents written in haste, documents that had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases had worn soft. The castle had kept everything. Every piece of correspondence that touched on Harry Potter, on the decisions made about him, around him, for him, without him, had found its way here. He pulled the oldest file. The one at the far left of the section. The one dated October 31st, 1981. He stood there for a very long time reading it. He was still standing there when Hermione arrived. She had found the room without being told. He had mentioned yesterday that he was going back, and she had that quality of knowing where people needed to be, and she came in quietly, looked at what he was holding, and waited. He knew, Harry said. His voice came out even. He had expected it not to. He knew about the Dursleys before he left me with them, he said. Not the specifics. Not everything. But there's a letter here, from McGonagall, dated the morning of November 1st, 1981. She'd been watching Privet Drive all day. She wrote to him that the Dursleys were, he stopped. He looked at the parchment in his hand. She wrote that they were the worst kind of muggles imaginable. That leaving a child with them would be a disaster. She said it directly, in those words, and he wrote back the same evening. He held out the second letter. Hermione took it. Read it. Her expression moved through something carefully controlled. He says, Harry said, because he had already memorized it, that the protection requires blood. That the love magic anchored in Lily Potter's sacrifice requires her closest living relative. That the sister is necessary for the enchantment to function regardless of other considerations. He looked at the wall. He calls me a variable he cannot afford to lose. In a letter dated the day after my parents died, he calls me a variable. The room was very quiet. Harry, Hermione began. I'm not, he stopped. Breathed. I'm not falling apart. I worked through most of this at 2 in the morning. I've known for a while, in the way you know things before you can prove them, that he made calculations. He set the letter down carefully. What I need is to understand which calculations he made about the school. About the students. About decisions that weren't just about me. He looked at her. Help me find them. She looked at him for a moment with the careful attention of someone doing a genuine welfare check rather than a procedural one. Then she put down her bag and started pulling files. They worked for 2 hours in near silence, the kind of focused parallel work that requires mutual trust and shared vocabulary. Ron arrived at 7:30 with breakfast stolen from the kitchens, toast wrapped in napkins, a pot of tea that was still actually hot, and joined without asking for an explanation, reading through whatever Hermione handed him and flagging things with a red quill she had apparently given him at some point. What emerged from the files, slowly, was not the portrait of a villain. It was something harder to sit with than that. Dumbledore had spent 40 years making decisions in the dark about things that would affect people who never knew they were being decided about. Some of those decisions had been brilliant. Some had been genuinely selfless. And some of them, a minority, but documented, clear-eyed, and in his own careful handwriting, had been choices that weighed individual welfare against strategic necessity and found the individual wanting. A student in the 1970s who had shown signs of dark magical affinity, Dumbledore's notes showed that the boy had been quietly monitored, his development shaped through carefully managed experiences, his friendships influenced through small interventions. He had become, eventually, a ministry official with strongly anti-dark magic views and a distinguished career. And he had never known. He had never known that his choices had been gardened. A family in the 1980s who had uncovered something about the wards, a detail of the castle's defenses that Dumbledore had been protecting, and who had been gently, thoroughly, methodically discouraged from pursuing their discovery until they let it drop. Dozens of students over decades whose potential had been assessed and managed and channeled through invisible hands. He thought he was helping, Ron said at one point, in a voice that was not defensive and not angry but just honest, the way Ron was honest when he was working something out. He genuinely believed he was making things better. He was, sometimes, Hermione said. She had a pile of files on her left that she'd been calling the evidence pile, and her tone was the one she used when she was doing something she found genuinely difficult, being fair about something she was also genuinely troubled by. The wards he maintained. The crises he prevented. There's a file in here about 3 separate dark wizard incursions between 1970 and 1985 that never became known because he stopped them before they materialized. Students who are alive and have no idea why. She looked at Harry. This isn't a record of a bad person. No, Harry said. It's a record of a person who decided he was the only one qualified to make certain decisions. And kept making them alone. For 50 years. He had been standing for the past hour, moving between the shelves, and he stopped now and looked at the section he'd been building toward, the section that wasn't about students at all. The section labeled in a hand that Harry recognized as the castle's own organizing principle rather than any human archivist's work, which he had started thinking of as the castle's editorial judgment. The section labeled, Ministry of Magic, Governance Interference, 1901, present. That's what I came for, he said. It took another hour to work through the relevant files, and what they found was, in the specific way of things that confirm what you already suspected, both unsurprising and breathtaking. The 1901 Education Act had not been a standalone piece of wizarding educational policy. It had been the outcome of a campaign. A sustained, coordinated effort by a ministry that had been watching Hogwarts' autonomous governance with increasing discomfort since the late 1890s, when a headmistress named Eugenia Blackwood had refused, twice, in terms that were apparently quite memorable, to comply with ministry requests to modify the school's curriculum in ways that would have served specific political interests. The act had been passed in the year after Blackwood's retirement. Its timing was, according to a commentary document written by her successor at the time, not accidental. More importantly, the act had been challenged. Twice. Once in 1923 and once in 1952. Both challenges had been withdrawn before the Wisingamot could rule on them, and both withdrawals had been accompanied by documentation, letters, notes, records of conversations, that suggested pressure had been applied to the challengers from within the ministry itself. In 1923, the challenger's principal witness had been relocated to a ministry posting in Aberdeen 3 weeks before the hearing date. In 1952, the challenge had simply been classified under the official secrets provisions of magical law, which meant no one outside the relevant departments had been able to see it. The 1952 case had never been declassified. Harry held the file for a long moment. If we declassify this, he said, it goes on record that the 1901 Act's authority has been challenged and that those challenges were suppressed. Yes, Hermione said. And if those challenges were valid, and the 1952 challenge specifically, then the Act's authority over the school charter is even weaker than the 1993 interpretation suggests. She was at the table with 3 books open around her, cross-referencing. Her hair was doing the thing it did under extreme intellectual pressure, expanding progressively outward like a bush responding to weather. Harry, if we can get the 1952 case seen by the Wisingamot before Fudge signs the order, can we? Ron asked. The castle has it, Harry said. He looked at the file. The castle has kept a copy. The official record was suppressed, but the castle's archive is independent of ministry classification. He looked at Hermione. Can a copy from the castle's archive be submitted as evidence in a Wisingamot hearing? She was already moving through one of the books. Under the Ancient Institutions Act of 1648, she said, reading fast, records held by a magically sovereign institution are admissible as primary evidence in any wizarding legal proceeding. The castle qualifies as a magically sovereign institution under, she turned 2 pages. Under the same charter provision that establishes its autonomous governance. She looked up. Harry. The castle's records are legally more authoritative than ministry documents. Ron put down his tea. We're going to win, he said, with quiet certainty. We're going to have a strong case, Hermione corrected, but she said it in the tone of someone who thought Ron was right. Harry looked at the files spread across the table, decades of institutional history, suppressed challenges, managed decisions, the long complicated record of a school and the forces that had wanted to control it. He thought about Dumbledore in the office last night, saying I am already moving, and he thought about the emergency order moving through the ministry's machinery right now, and he thought about 48 hours. I need to talk to Dumbledore, he said. He found him in the Transfiguration classroom. Dumbledore was alone in the room. His elective didn't begin until afternoon, doing something at the board that was not preparation for a lesson but which was clearly, from the focused intensity of it, actual work. He was drawing a diagram in chalk, complex and precise, annotating it in the small handwriting he used when he was thinking rather than communicating. When Harry came in he did not immediately stop, which Harry noted as a sign that the morning's working relationship was already different from what it had been 48 hours ago. He finished the annotation, set down the chalk, and turned. He read Harry's face in approximately 1 second. You've been in the archive. Since 6 this morning, Harry said. Ah. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. He looked at the chalk-dusted fingers of his good hand, then at the blackened ones. I wondered when you would. Why didn't you tell me about the letters from 1981? Harry asked. Directly. No approach. Dumbledore said nothing for a moment. He moved to his desk and sat on its edge rather than behind it, a less formal posture, which Harry recognized as a choice. Because there is no version of that letter that is not painful to you, he said. And I have told myself for many years that the pain it would cause would outweigh the value of your knowing. But that's the same calculation, Harry said. That's the same reasoning. You're still deciding what I'm allowed to know about my own life because you think you're better positioned to weigh the costs. Dumbledore looked at him. Yes, he said. You're right. It is. He said it without defense, which was harder to be angry at than a defense would have been and which Harry suspected Dumbledore knew. I'm not here to relitigate my childhood, Harry said. I'm here because I found the 1952 Wisengamot case. Something shifted in Dumbledore's expression. A very brief, very controlled alertness. You found that. The castle kept a copy, Harry said. Independent of the ministry classification. Legally admissible under the Ancient Institutions Act. He watched Dumbledore carefully. You knew it existed. I knew a challenge had been made, Dumbledore said slowly. I did not know the castle had preserved the documentation. He paused. I suspected. I never confirmed it. Why didn't you use it? Harry asked. When Umbridge was here before, when Fudge was actively removing you, you had evidence that the ministry's authority over this school was legally questionable, and you didn't use it. Dumbledore was quiet for long enough that the silence had weight. Outside the classroom windows, the morning had brightened into full September sun, the grounds sharp and clear and ordinary with students moving between buildings. Because, he said, using it would have required a public legal challenge to the ministry in the middle of a war. It would have divided the wizarding community at a moment when division was dangerous. It would have made Hogwarts the battleground for an institutional conflict while Voldemort was using every fracture he could find. He met Harry's eyes. It was a calculation. Was it the right one? Harry asked. I don't know, Dumbledore said. And that, Harry thought, was the most honest thing he had said in all the years Harry had known him. I genuinely do not know. Harry sat down in one of the student chairs. It was strange, sitting in a student chair in a classroom and looking at Dumbledore on the other side of it, the geometry completely inverted from every class, every meeting, every carefully managed conversation they'd had. I'm going to use it, Harry said. The 1952 case. I'm going to get it to the Wisengamot before Fudge signs the order. That's approximately 40 hours, Dumbledore said. 41, Harry said. I counted. You'll need a Wisengamot advocate. Someone who can file an emergency injunction against the order on the basis of the suppressed challenge. He paused. Someone the Wisengamot will take seriously at very short notice. I know, Harry said. I was going to ask if you knew someone. Dumbledore looked at him, and something in that look was stripped all the way back. No management, no calculation, just a very old man looking at a 17-year-old who was carrying things he should never have had to carry and carrying them well. I know precisely the right person, he said. I should warn you that she is extremely expensive, deeply opinionated, and will almost certainly argue with you about 3 separate elements of your strategy. Hermione argues with me constantly, Harry said. I can handle it. Something that was genuinely close to a smile crossed Dumbledore's face. Her name is Wilhelmina Voss. She's argued 4 cases before the full Wisengamot in the past decade, won 3, and the 4th she lost on a procedural technicality she has been correcting the record on ever since. He stood. I'll send the owl myself. Thank you, Harry said. He stood to go. At the classroom door he stopped, because there was something else, something that had been sitting in his chest since 6 that morning, and he had been deciding whether to say it. He turned around. The boy, he said. From the 70s. The one whose friendships you managed. Dumbledore had been turning toward his desk. He went still. He's alive, Harry said. He had a good life, by the look of it. He didn't suffer, from what the record shows. He paused. But he didn't get to choose it. The classroom was very quiet. No, Dumbledore said. He did not. Neither did I, Harry said. For most of my life. He let that sit for a moment. Not as punishment. Just as fact. I know, Dumbledore said. His voice was very low. I'm choosing now, Harry said. Every day I'm here, it's a choice. And I want you to understand that. Because it means this, he gestured, the office and the school and everything around them, means something different than what you were doing. Not better, maybe. Just different. He looked at him. You moved pieces. I'm not going to do that. He left. In the corridor, the castle was warm around him, and somewhere below a class was beginning, and somewhere above his office held its papers and its portraits and the accumulated weight of 1,000 years deciding that this particular person, at this particular moment, was the right one for this. He walked toward the stairs, toward whatever the next hour held, and felt no need to explain himself further. Wilhelmina Voss arrived by Floo at 2:30, approximately 6 hours after Dumbledore's owl left, and with a speed that suggested she had been waiting for an interesting case and had received one. She was 70, short, brown-skinned, with silver hair worn severe and close, and she wore robes of dark green that were expensive in the way of things that don't announce themselves. She stepped out of the headmaster's office fireplace without any apparent transition difficulty, no stumbling, no ash on her robes, just a step from one place to another, and looked at Harry with the assessment of someone who had spent 50 years reading rooms and people in approximately equal measure. You're younger than Albus made you sound, she said. And he made you sound 17. I am 17, Harry said. She looked around the office, at the portraits, at the desk, at the feel of the room. The castle's chosen, then. I can feel it. She turned back to him. Show me what you have. Harry nodded to Hermione, who had been standing by the side table with the files organized into 3 distinct piles in the particular way of someone who has rehearsed this moment precisely. She began explaining, and Voss listened without interrupting, which Harry recognized as the behavior of someone who was doing very fast parallel processing rather than waiting politely. When Hermione finished, Voss looked at the 1952 file for 30 seconds. Then she looked up. This is significant. Yes, Harry said. The Ministry is going to argue provenance, she said. The castle's archive is legally authoritative, but it's never been tested in a modern Wisengamot context. They'll challenge it. And you'll answer the challenge, Harry said. I'll answer it and I'll win it, she said crisply, with no false modesty whatsoever. But I want you to understand the timeline. An emergency injunction filed today goes before the expedited panel within 24 hours. The panel has 3 members. Fudge will have advance warning that we're filing, that's unavoidable under disclosure rules, and he will attempt to sign the order before the panel convenes. Can he do that? Ron asked, from his corner. Technically yes, Voss said. Practically, if the order is signed after an injunction has been filed, we argue bad faith and the order becomes voidable. She set the file down. It becomes a legal mess that benefits no one, which is exactly the kind of position the ministry doesn't want to be in. She looked at Harry. This case is actually quite strong. The 1952 suppression, the charter precedents, the Ancient Institutions Act, it makes a compelling argument. But? Harry asked, because there was clearly a but. But strong legal arguments take time to resolve, she said. The injunction buys you days, perhaps a week. The full case, having the Wiesengemot formally rule on the charter versus the 1901 Act, could take months. During which time you are the headmaster, she said plainly, and the castle supports you, and the legal process is ongoing, and anyone attempting to physically execute the emergency order against the castle's express governance magic is going to have a very uncomfortable experience. Harry looked at her for a moment. File the injunction, he said. She picked up the 1952 file. I'll need 3 hours and access to your flu. Both yours, Harry said. She moved to the side table and began working without further ceremony. Hermione stationed herself nearby with the obvious intent of being useful, and Voss, after approximately 30 seconds, said, "You read quickly," and Hermione said, "Yes," and they began working together with the smoothly efficient energy of two people who have immediately recognized something useful in each other. Ron appeared at Harry's shoulder. "I think Hermione's found her person," he said quietly. "Don't tell her that," Harry said. "She'll deny it for months." At 4 o'clock, with the injunction 30 minutes from being filed, Harry went to find Neville. He was in the greenhouses, which was where Neville spent his free periods now without apparent self-consciousness, working alongside Professor Sprout on something involving a plant Harry didn't recognize that smelled remarkably like burnt caramel. Sprout looked up when Harry came in, assessed the situation, said, 10 minutes, Longbottom, to Neville, and went to attend to something else with the graceful tact of someone who knows when to create private space. Neville was repotting something with careful hands. He didn't look up immediately. "How's the archive?" "Comprehensive," Harry said. "Find anything about the school's defenses?" "A lot," Harry said. He sat on an overturned pot, the available seating in greenhouses was always creative, and looked at Neville. "I need something from you." Neville looked up. His eyes were steady, as they always were, with that particular levelness that Harry had come to think of as Neville's permanent setting. "What?" "I found records about the DA, Harry said. "The room we used. The training." He paused. "The castle knew about it. Not just knew, it helped. The room that gave us space, gave us what we needed. It was deliberate." He looked at Neville. "You were the one who understood that. You said so, the other morning, you said you just pay attention." "I do," Neville said. "The castle pays attention to you too," Harry said. "In a specific way. There are records in the archive of students the castle has, noticed. Marked, in some way. You're in there." He watched Neville's face move through something. "The entry about you is interesting." "What does it say?" Neville asked. "It says," Harry said carefully, "that you are the most consistently loyal person in this building. That your understanding of what Hogwarts is for, what it's actually for, not what it's used for, matches the castle's own understanding more closely than almost anyone here." He paused. "Including me." Neville was quiet for a moment, looking at the plant in his hands. That can't be right." "The castle doesn't flatter," Harry said. "It records." Neville turned the pot in his hands. "What do you need?" he asked again. "When this gets difficult, and it's going to get difficult, in the next few days, I need someone who understands the school." Not the politics, not the legal argument, not the magic of the headmaster's authority. Just the school itself. The rooms. The rhythms. The students. He looked at Neville. I need someone who can tell me when I'm getting it wrong in ways I can't see because I'm too close to the strategy. Neville set the pot down. You want me to be your reality check. I want you to be someone I can trust to tell me the truth about what's happening on the ground, Harry said. In the houses. Among the students. Not intelligence, just honesty. Neville was quiet for another moment. Then, in the simple, undemonstrative way he had of agreeing to things, all right. That's it? Harry asked. What else would there be? Neville said, and picked up the pot again. The injunction was filed at 4:47. Voss departed by Floo with the file copies and a brusque instruction for Harry to be reachable by mirror at 6 the following morning. The office felt slightly larger without her in it, which was interesting given her height. Hermione stood in the middle of the room with a slightly dazed expression that she was working to organize. She's extraordinary, she said, in a tone that was trying very hard to be analytical. I know, Harry said. Her argument structure on the Ancient Institutions Act precedent is, I'd already found the provision, but the way she's deploying it in the injunction, she's turned it into a three-part construct that, Hermione, Ron said. Yes. You're doing the thing. She looked at him. What thing? The thing where you talk about legal argument the way other people talk about Quidditch. She turned back to her notes. I don't know what you mean, she said, but the tips of her ears had gone slightly pink. Harry looked at the window. Evening coming on. The grounds going golden. 40 hours reduced now to something closer to 30, the injunction filed, the case beginning to move. The ministry would know within the hour. Fudge would know. Umbridge would know. She'll come tomorrow, he said, not to anyone specific. Once she knows about the injunction. She'll push to be here before the expedited panel convenes. Let her come, Ron said simply. Harry looked at him. She keeps underestimating you, Ron said. Keep letting her. He shrugged. It's working. Harry thought about that. He thought about Umbridge standing on the moonlit path last night, looking up at the castle, and he thought about what it meant that she had left rather than stayed, and he thought about all the ways the next 24 hours could go. There's one more thing, he said. He went to the desk and opened the bottom drawer, the one the castle had shown him on the second day, the one he had looked at once and then closed. He removed the item inside it and set it on the desk. A book. Old, leather-bound, no title on the spine. The castle's own record, not the archive downstairs, which was vast and organized and accessible, but this. A smaller volume. Personal in a way that the archive was not. He had opened the first page that second morning and seen the date, October 31st, 993 AD, and the single line beneath it written in a hand that was not human in any way he could identify, the school begins. The school will remember. What is that? Hermione asked. The castle's own account, Harry said. Not governance records. Not decisions and letters and calculations. The castle's actual, he stopped, searching for the right word. Memory. What it thinks happened. What it values. He looked at them both. I haven't read past the first page. Why not? Ron asked. Harry looked at the book. Because it felt like reading someone's private thoughts, he said. And I wasn't sure I had the right. The fire crackled. The portraits breathed in their frames, the sleeping ones shifting, the waking ones silent in a way that felt like the room leaning in. You have the right, said Helewise, from her frame near the ceiling, in the clear calm voice of someone stating something that was already settled. You have always had the right. The castle gave it to you when it chose you. She looked at him. The question is not whether you have the right to read it. The question is whether you are ready to understand what it says about what this place is and what it needs you to do. Harry looked at the book. Then he picked it up, sat down in the chair behind the desk, and opened to the second page. Outside, the evening deepened into dark. The injunction was moving through the ministry's overnight legal machinery. In London, Fudge was reading a document that told him his emergency order had been legally complicated. Somewhere in the guest corridor, Umbridge had received a mirror message that would tell her the same. And in the headmaster's office at Hogwarts, under the watching portraits and the ancient light of the fire, Harry Potter was reading the castle's own account of itself, of what it was built to be, what it had watched, what it had endured, and what it had finally, after 1,000 years of patience, decided to trust with its heart. He read for a very long time. Chapter 5, The Battle for Hogwarts Soul. She came at 7 in the morning with 12 people. Harry was at the entrance hall doors when the delegation arrived, not because Phineas had warned him, though Phineas had, but because the castle had woken him at 5:30 with the kind of urgent warmth that was less good morning and more get up now. He had dressed, gone to the window, and watched the two ministry carriages rolling through the pre-dawn dark toward the gates with the deliberate pace of something that had already decided the outcome. He had gone downstairs immediately. McGonagall was already there. She had clearly not slept either, and she stood beside Harry at the base of the stairs with her robes immaculate and her expression the professional equivalent of a closed blast door. On Harry's other side, and slightly behind, Dumbledore had appeared from somewhere. Harry hadn't heard him on the stairs, and was standing with his hands clasped and his face entirely still, wearing the dark blue robes he kept for formal occasions, which told Harry that Dumbledore had also been awake since before the carriages arrived. None of them had discussed standing here together. They had simply arrived at the same point by individual judgment, which Harry found more reassuring than any coordinated plan would have been. The doors opened. Umbridge came in first. She was in pink, a different pink from yesterday, darker, almost professional, the cardigan replaced by a proper ministry robe with the departmental seal at the breast, and she had the expression of a woman who had spent the night transitioning from strategy to certainty. Behind her came Rook, and behind Rook two people Harry recognized from the Wizengamot Public Gallery, senior members, both of them, robes with the gold trim of judicial authority. Behind them, Warrington of the Board of Governors. Behind Warrington, 6 ministry aurors in full working robes. Aurors. She had brought aurors to a school. Harry looked at them without changing his expression. He counted the wands visible at their belts. He looked at their faces, professional, controlled, the specific blankness of people executing an order they hadn't necessarily chosen. He looked at Umbridge. "You brought aurors," he said. Flat. Factual. "The ministry's authority requires," Rook began. "To a school," Harry said. "With children in it. Sleeping." The word sleeping did something in the room. One of the aurors' faces moved slightly. The entrance hall, stone and torchlight and the smell of 1,000 years of mourning, seemed to take the word in and hold it. "The ministry's authority," Umbridge said pleasantly, "has been formally invoked under Emergency Education Order 7-2. The order was signed by Minister Fudge at 11:45 last night. Before the expedited injunction panel convened," Harry said. "Which was scheduled for 9 this morning. So he signed it after the injunction was filed and before the panel could assess it." He looked directly at the two Wizengamot members behind her. "You're aware that makes the order potentially voidable under the bad faith provisions of Wizarding administrative law." The two Wizengamot members exchanged a look. It was brief and controlled but visible. "The panel," Umbridge said, "has no authority to block a ministerial order before it comes into force. The legal process runs parallel, not prior." She took one step forward. "Under Order 7-2, I am authorized to assume temporary oversight of Hogwarts School, with executive authority over governance decisions pending the resolution of the governance dispute." She paused. "I am asking you, Harry, to cooperate with this process. And I'm telling you," Harry said, "that the order doesn't work." Umbridge blinked. "I beg your pardon." "The order grants executive authority to a ministry-appointed overseer," Harry said. It's written to function within the framework of normal school governance. Headmaster authority, Board of Governors oversight, Ministry educational jurisdiction. He held her gaze. But this school's governance is not currently functioning under normal parameters. The castle's autonomous authority is active. And the castle does not recognize the emergency education order. He said the last part without drama and without raising his voice, but the entrance hall responded to it in the specific way it had been responding to him all week. The torches brightened fractionally, the stone resonated with that deep low note, and the warmth that lived under his sternum pulsed once like a heartbeat confirming it was there. Umbridge felt it. Harry saw it in the slight shift of her weight. That is a theoretical argument, she said. Test it, Harry said. Try to exercise executive authority. Issue a directive. See if the castle complies. A beat. Then, from behind Umbridge, one of the Aurors said, not loudly, not challengingly, just carefully, the voice of someone who is doing their job and asking a fair professional question, Sir. Are you refusing ministry authority? Harry looked at the Auror. Young, maybe mid-20s, sharp-featured, standing with the physical readiness of good training. What's your name? Harry asked. The Auror hesitated. Williamson. Williamson. You were sent here to enforce the order. I understand that. You're doing your job. Harry's voice stayed level. But I need you to understand what you're being asked to enforce. This is a school. There are 700 children in this building, some of them are 11 years old and none of them have done anything except attend their classes. The castle's ancient magic is protecting them. An emergency order cannot override that protection, and if the ministry attempts to use force against that magic, in a building full of children, the consequences are not something any of us wants on record. He looked at Williamson steadily. So I'm not refusing ministry authority. I'm asking everyone in this room to think carefully about what enforcing it would actually look like. The entrance hall was completely silent. Williamson looked at Harry. Looked at the other Aurors. Looked at Umbridge's back. He said nothing, which was a kind of answer. The expedited panel convenes at 9, Harry said, to the room. 2 hours from now. I'm asking everyone to wait 2 hours. He looked at Umbridge. 2 hours. Then whatever the panel decides, we deal with it. Umbridge's expression had gone through several transitions in the last 30 seconds, all of them controlled. She was looking at Harry with the look he had seen from her the night she'd come alone to the entrance hall, that genuine recalibration, the reluctant acknowledgement that the opponent in front of her was not the one she had prepared for. She opened her mouth. The doors at the top of the stairs opened. Snape came down the stairs with a piece of parchment in his hand and the particular velocity of a man who has been moving at pace since before most people in this building were aware there was a reason to. He came down without looking at the delegation, went directly to Harry, and said, in a voice precisely calibrated to carry to the entire entrance hall without appearing to be raised, the panel has moved its convening time. 7:45. They received the minister's signature documentation overnight and determined the bad faith question was time-sensitive. He handed Harry the parchment. Voss sent this by emergency Patronus 20 minutes ago. Harry read it. 45 minutes. He looked at Umbridge. The panel convenes in 45 minutes, he said. I'm going to attend via mirror connection from the headmaster's office. He turned to McGonagall. Professor McGonagall, would you escort our visitors to the Great Hall? Breakfast will be available shortly. McGonagall stepped forward. Certainly, she said, in the tone that moved people like a very polite tide. Umbridge said, I'd like to attend the panel proceedings. The panel is closed, Harry said. Parties and their advocates only. You're welcome to send your own advocate. He started up the stairs. 45 minutes. The mirror connection was established in the headmaster's office, the fireplace expanded by the castle into a viewing surface wide enough for Harry to see the 3 panel members clearly, older witches and wizards in the gold-trimmed robes of Wisengamot judicial authority, seated behind the elevated bench of a small hearing room in London that Harry had only ever seen in illustrations. Voss was already there, standing at the advocate's position with her files and her dark green robes and the specific posture of someone who has argued before more intimidating venues and found them wanting. She acknowledged Harry's appearance in the mirror with a brief nod. The ministry's advocate, a wizard Harry didn't know, middle-aged, ministry blue, was at the opposing position with a folder of documents and the expression of someone who had expected more preparation time and was managing without it. The panel chair, a silver-haired witch named Marchbanks whom Harry recognized distantly as the examiner from his OWLs, called the proceedings to order with brisk efficiency. This is an expedited review of the bad faith claim regarding Emergency Education Order 7-2. The question before this panel is whether the order, signed after the filing of an injunction challenging the legal authority it relies upon, constitutes bad faith under Wizarding Administrative Law Section 43. Advocates, opening positions. Voss went first. She was extraordinary. Harry had seen her work for 3 hours yesterday on the injunction and had understood intellectually that she was exceptional, but watching her argue live was something different. She was not theatrical, she had none of the performative flourishes Harry associated with arguments that needed ornamentation to distract from weakness. She was clear, precise, and structured, building her case the way a stonemason builds a wall, each piece tested before the next was placed, the whole thing self-supporting by the end. The ministerial advocate attempted 3 separate interruptions. Marchbanks permitted none of them. When Voss reached the 1952 case, when she laid the castle's archival copy on the table and explained its legal status under the Ancient Institutions Act, the panel members went very still in the specific way of people confronting something they had not known existed and were rapidly calculating the implications of. The 1952 challenge, Voss said, established that the 1901 Education Act's authority over Hogwarts was legally questionable on charter grounds. That challenge was suppressed, not ruled upon, not dismissed on merits, but suppressed through administrative action, which means its legal question was never resolved. It remains open. It has been open for 73 years. She let that sit. The ministry signed an emergency order relying on the authority of an act whose own validity is under active question. That is not merely procedurally improper. It is the definition of bad faith. The ministerial advocate stood up. The 1952 suppression was properly authorized under a classification provision that was itself subsequently repealed in 1978, Voss said, without looking at him. The classification has no standing. The document is public record. I have simply located it. One of the panel members leaned forward. Advocate Voss. The castle's archive, the provenance of this document. Has it been tested? Under the Ancient Institutions Act of 1648, Voss said, records held by a magically sovereign institution are primary evidence. The castle has been recognized as a magically sovereign institution in no fewer than 4 previous Wisengamot proceedings, most recently in 1984. She produced another file. I've listed the citations. The panel member sat back. The ministerial advocate made 2 more arguments. Voss answered both. The second one she answered so efficiently that the advocate did not attempt a third. Marchbanks called a recess for deliberation. Harry sat in the fireplace's expanded reflection and waited, and in the room behind him he could hear the castle being quiet in the way it was quiet when it was paying close attention, and he thought about the book he had read the night before, the castle's own account, the 2nd and 3rd and 4th pages, what the school had written about itself across 1,000 years. The school was built to be a place where young people became themselves, the castle had written, in that strange not quite human hand. Not where they became useful. Not where they became powerful. Where they became themselves. Every headmaster who remembered this was the right headmaster. Every headmaster who forgot it was not wrong, merely insufficient. He had sat with that for a long time. Marchbanks came back. She called the panel to order. She looked directly at the mirror, at Harry's reflected presence, and then at the ministry's advocate, and then she said, in the measured tone of someone who has made a clear decision and is delivering it without drama, this panel finds that Emergency Education Order 7-2 was signed in bad faith under Wizarding Administrative Law Section 43. The order is suspended pending the full Wiesengemot review of the underlying charter question. Ministry personnel are instructed to refrain from any enforcement action at Hogwarts School during the suspension period. She looked at Marchbanks. The injunction stands. The review hearing will be scheduled within the next 30 days. The ministerial advocate was already writing something furiously. Voss turned to the mirror, and Harry saw in her expression the controlled satisfaction of someone who has done exactly what they set out to do. She gave him a single nod. Harry sat back in the chair. The fire crackled. The castle's warmth settled through him like something exhaled. "Right," he said quietly, to no one in particular. From her portrait near the ceiling, Helleweis said, "Well done," with the tone of someone who had not doubted but is glad to be confirmed. Telling Umbridge was not going to be pleasant. Harry knew this with the same certainty he knew most things about her. She was not someone who received reversal with grace, and she was not someone whose strategy dissolved when the first approach failed. She was someone who recalculated and came back. But he walked into the great hall at 8:15, where the delegation was having an awkward breakfast at a separate table in the corner that the students were eyeing with varying levels of curiosity and hostility, and he crossed the room to Umbridge, and he told her directly and without embellishment what the panel had decided. She listened. Her face did not change. She set down her teacup. "The review process will take a month," she said. "Approximately," Harry said. "And during that month, the school continues under your governance." "Yes." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the 6 Aurors ranged around the table, who were eating with the focused efficiency of people making the best of a changed situation, and then she looked at Warrington, who had not met her eyes since Harry came in. Then she looked back at Harry. "I want to make something clear to you," she said softly. "This is not over." "I know," Harry said. "The Wiesengemot review could go any number of ways," she said. "The political climate is not favorable to autonomous institutional authority. There are members who will see the charter precedent as dangerous. Who will argue that a school where the castle can simply override ministry governance is a school that cannot be held accountable." She paused. "They're not entirely wrong." Harry sat down across from her. He had not planned to sit, but something in what she was saying required engagement rather than dismissal. "Say more," he said. She looked at him with a slight alteration in her expression, still controlled, still strategic, but genuine in some thread underneath it. "Accountability," she said. "You talk about the castle's authority, about the charter, about ancient institutional autonomy. But the Wiesengemot's concern will be this: if Hogwarts can make its own governance decisions without ministry oversight, what prevents this school from becoming something it should not be? What prevents the next headmaster the castle chooses from being someone who uses that authority wrongly?" She held his gaze. "The oversight I represent, the oversight you have been fighting since Monday, exists because institutions without accountability become dangerous. Even well-intentioned ones." Harry was quiet for a moment. Around them the great hall was filling with students coming down for breakfast, the noise of 700 people beginning their day creating a buffer of sound around this particular table. He looked at Umbridge and thought about what he'd read in the castle's book last night, and what he'd found in the archive, and what he knew about the difference between oversight and control. "You're right that institutions need accountability," he said. "You're wrong about what form it should take." He leaned forward slightly. "The ministry's accountability mechanism for Hogwarts has been used 3 times in the last 20 years. Once to force curriculum changes that benefited a ministry department. Once to protect a teacher who was harming students. Once this week, to override a governance decision the castle made independently." He held her eyes. "That's not accountability. That's control. And it's control that has consistently prioritized institutional politics over student welfare." He paused. "I'm not opposed to oversight. I'm opposed to that oversight. Something moved in her face. And you propose what instead? A board of governors with actual authority, Harry said. Not decorative authority, not a rubber stamp for ministry decisions, real authority, exercised by people who understand education and have a genuine stake in this school. Regular public reporting on the school's standards and welfare metrics, available to any parent or student. A student representative council with a formal voice in governance decisions. He paused. Not ministry control. Transparent, public accountability. She was looking at him the way she had looked at him the night in the entrance hall, that genuine assessment, the sense of something being reconsidered. That's quite a developed proposal, she said. I've been thinking about it since Monday, Harry said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, something she clearly had not planned to say, something that came from a different place than the rest of the conversation. Do you know what I've actually wanted to do, for the last 15 years? My actual goal. Not what the ministry has used me for. Harry waited. I've wanted to make sure that children in this school are safe, she said. Not safe from dark magic specifically. Safe. That they are taught well. That the adults around them are held to account. That no one falls through the gaps. She looked at the students filling the hall. I have used wrong methods. I have confused control with safety because for a long time the ministry conflated them and I didn't question it enough. She paused. But the goal was not wrong. Harry looked at her for a long time. He thought about what it would be easy to do, to dismiss this, to use the panel victory to end the conversation, to treat her as a defeated obstacle and move on. He thought about what the Castle's book had said about headmasters who remembered what the school was for. I know, he said. And I'm not interested in making you the villain of this. You had genuine reasons. Some of them were right. He held her gaze. The Board of Governors proposal. The accountability structure I described. I'd want people involved who understand what safe actually looks like for students. Who have that as a primary concern. He paused. Not me telling you this is over. Me asking if you have any interest in building something that actually works. The silence between them was a different quality than any silence they'd had in the previous 4 days. Warrington, who had been sitting very still through this entire exchange, said, quietly, almost to himself, that's not the conversation I expected to be having at breakfast. The Aurors left at 10. Rook left with them, with the expression of a man who had written and rewritten his report 3 times in his head since 7 that morning and still wasn't happy with any version. Umbridge stayed. Not in any official capacity. She had a room in the guest corridor, and she moved through the school that day with the deliberate inconspicuousness of someone who has been professionally visible for so long that invisibility requires active effort. Harry didn't interfere with it. He told McGonagall to let her be, and McGonagall looked at him with an expression that contained several questions she chose not to ask. By midday Harry had 3 other problems to deal with, which was something he was beginning to understand as the texture of governance, the way the immediate crisis never fully resolves before the next one is already in motion. The first, Draco Malfoy had come to his office at 9, sat down across the desk, and said, without preamble, "My father is coming." Harry looked at him. To Hogwarts? He'll find a reason, Malfoy said. He was sitting with careful posture, hands on his knees, wearing his uniform with the Slytherin prefect badge that he touched sometimes without seeming aware of it. The order being suspended gives him a window. He's on the Board of Governors, technically. He was removed last year after the chamber business came out properly, but he's been working to reinstate himself. He looked at Harry with the flat, honest gaze that had been replacing the performance incrementally since Monday. He'll come as a concerned parent. He's very good at concerned parent. What does he actually want? Harry asked. To see what you are, Malfoy said. And whether you can be managed. Can I? Harry asked. Something that was not quite a smile moved across Malfoy's face. No, he said. But he won't know that until he tries. He paused. I'm telling you so you're not surprised. That's what I'm doing here. He looked at his hands for a moment. I'm not going to help him. In case that wasn't clear. Harry looked at him steadily. It's clear, he said. Thank you. Malfoy stood. He had almost reached the door when Harry said, Malfoy. He stopped. You're a prefect, Harry said. 5th through 7th year students in Slytherin are watching how you move this year. How you choose. He paused. I'm not telling you how to use that. I'm just noting it. Malfoy stood with his back to the room for a moment. Then, without turning around, I know, he said, and left. The second problem arrived at noon in the form of a staff delegation, 3 professors, led by the defense substitute whose name was Carmichael, who had apparently been coordinating their concerns since Monday and had chosen this particular moment to present them. They came in with the carefully organized energy of people who have a document and intended to use it. The document, which Carmichael placed on the desk with the slightly aggressive precision of someone delivering a formal complaint, outlined 4 concerns: the lack of formal consultation with staff on the injunction filing, the ongoing uncertainty about governance structure if the Wisingamot review produced an adverse result, the communication gap between the headmaster's office and the teaching staff on daily operational matters, and, this was the 4th one, delivered with the least eye contact, the perception among some staff that the headmaster's office is operating through an inner circle rather than the formal staff structure. Harry read all 4. He read them carefully. He was aware that Carmichael was watching for a reaction, and he was aware that the reaction Carmichael was braced for was either dismissal or defensiveness. He gave neither. The communication gap is real, he said. I've been moving fast and I've been briefing Professor McGonagall rather than the broader staff. That's a valid concern and I'll fix it. He looked up. Weekly staff briefings, Mondays. I'll host them personally. Anyone can ask anything. He set the document down. The inner circle comment, I hear it. Hermione and Ron are here because I trust them and because they're useful. I'll be honest about that. But the actual decisions run through Professor McGonagall and through the staff structure. He paused. What does the staff actually need from me to feel included? Carmichael had not expected the question. He blinked. We would like to be consulted before significant external legal actions are taken. Fair, Harry said. Done. He looked at the 3 of them. Any other concerns I should know about? Not from the document, from you personally. Another blink. Then Carmichael said, slowly, there are teachers on staff who don't think this works. Who think a student as headmaster, regardless of the castle's choice, is inherently unstable and that the school's reputation and accreditation are at risk. Which teachers? Harry asked. I'm not to punish them, Harry said. To talk to them. Directly. I'd rather have that conversation than have people being quietly obstructionist. He looked at them. This school works best when everyone in it is honest. Including with me. Carmichael looked at the other 2. Then back at Harry. I'll let them know, he said. They left. The third problem was, in many ways, the simplest and the hardest. At 2 o'clock, the castle's warmth did its shifting thing, and Harry followed it to a corridor on the 3rd floor where a group of 4 Slytherin second-years had cornered a single Gryffindor first-year against the wall and were doing nothing so dramatic as cursing her, just standing in a configuration that was clearly engineered to frighten, wearing the flat expression of children who had learned to perform power by watching adults perform it. Harry walked around the corner and stopped. He looked at the 4 Slytherins. He looked at the first-year, who had gone very still against the wall with her arms around her bag and her face arranged in the careful blankness of someone who has learned that showing fear makes it worse. Go to your common room, Harry said to the 4 Slytherins. Not loudly. Not with particular drama. They went. One of them looked back once and then looked forward again very quickly. Harry looked at the first year. She was brown-haired, small, wearing her Gryffindor tie slightly too loose. She was looking at him with an expression that was trying to assess whether this was better or worse than what had just been happening. "Are you all right?" Harry asked. "Yes," she said. Then, slightly more honestly, a bit shaky. "That's fine," Harry said. "Being shaky is fine." He crouched slightly so they were closer to eye level. "What's your name?" "Clara," she said. "Clara Okonkwo." "Has this happened before, Clara?" A pause. "A few times," she said. "You should have told someone," Harry said. "I didn't want to be," she stopped. "A problem," Harry finished. She looked at him, surprised. "You're not a problem," Harry said. "Those four are the problem. You're a student, and this school is supposed to be safe for you. That's the actual primary function of this place." He straightened. "I'm going to talk to their head of house. And I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen again." "Is there anyone specific, anyone who's been particularly—" "The tall one with the blonde hair," she said, and then looked like she immediately wished she hadn't. "All right," Harry said. "Thank you for telling me." He nodded toward the corridor. "You'll be late for class." She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was working through the fact that she had just had a 30-second conversation with the headmaster of Hogwarts about her own safety, and that it had been straightforward and direct and hadn't cost her anything. Then she said, "Thank you," and went. Harry stood in the corridor alone and thought about the castle's book. Where they became themselves. He thought about Clara Okonkwo being small against a wall with her arms around her bag, learning the lesson that power was something other people had. He thought about what that lesson costs, lived over years. He went to find the head of Slytherin House. At 4 o'clock he was back in the headmaster's office when the door opened and Neville came in, which meant something was happening on the ground. "The 4 Slytherin students," Neville said. "Their head of house had a conversation with them. 2 of them came to their dormitory and told their friends about it, and now," he paused. "There's a feeling in Slytherin House. Like something shifted." "Good or bad?" Harry asked. "Neither yet," Neville said. "Just, shifting. Like when you move something heavy and the room hasn't settled around the new arrangement." "Are they scared?" Harry asked. "Some," Neville said. "Some are angry. A few, the older ones, are watching. Like they're deciding something." He paused. "Malfoy talked to them after dinner last night." "I don't know what he said." Harry looked at the fire. Outside the window the afternoon had gone overcast, the grounds grey and still. "Thank you," he said. Neville started to leave. Then, at the door, Harry. "The castle did something this afternoon." Harry looked at him. Clara Okonkwo, the first year, she got back to Gryffindor Tower and her dormitory was different. Warmer. The window seat had cushions on it that hadn't been there before. He paused. "I don't think the castle is just following you anymore. I think it's paying attention to what you do and extrapolating." Harry was quiet for a moment. "The castle takes care of the people in it," he said. "Yes," Neville said. "But it's doing it more visibly now. Like it wants people to notice." He looked at Harry. "Like it wants people to feel it." After Neville left, Harry sat for a long time with that thought. Umbridge knocked on the headmaster's office door at 6. Harry said come in, and she came in, and she was not holding a clipboard, and she was wearing an expression that Harry had not seen on her before, something stripped back and direct that was not warm but was real. She sat in the visitor's chair without being invited to, which was an interesting choice. "I have one question," she said. "And I want an honest answer." "Go ahead," Harry said. "When this is over," she said. "When the Wisengamot review resolves, one way or another. When the political crisis settles. When you've made whatever you're going to make of this school." She held his gaze. Will the students be safer? Not the reputation. Not the institution. The students. The actual children. Harry looked at her. Yes, he said. She studied him for a moment. I'm going to hold you to that, she said. Not as a threat. As a statement of intent. Good, Harry said. She stood. Started toward the door. Then, with her back to him, the accountability proposal you described at breakfast. I want to see it in writing. I'll have Hermione draft it by tomorrow, Harry said. She left. Harry sat in a quiet office and thought about the battle that had been fought that day, not a single confrontation but a dozen simultaneous ones, fought across different registers and terrain. Legal, institutional, personal, interpersonal. Clara Okonkwo against a corridor wall. Malfoy choosing a side. Carmichael with a document of legitimate grievances. Umbridge asking an honest question. He thought about what winning looked like. Not the panel ruling, that was tactics. He thought about what the castle had been trying to build toward, across 1,000 years of patience, and what it had finally decided this particular person might be able to do. Not where they became useful. Where they became themselves. The fire burned low. Outside, the last light left the sky and the grounds went to dark, and somewhere in the building 700 people were eating dinner and arguing about homework and laughing about things that had nothing to do with politics or legal precedent or institutional governance, and the castle held all of it, warm and permanent and paying attention. Harry picked up the quill. Started writing. The door opened. It was Hermione, with Ron behind her, and their expressions were the specific combination that meant news, significant news, the kind that changes tomorrow's shape. What? Harry said. Hermione set a piece of parchment on the desk. Voss sent another Patronus, she said. The Wisengamot Review. They've fast-tracked it. 2 weeks, not 30 days. She paused. And 3 Wisengamot members have sent private communications requesting copies of the 1952 file. Ron was grinning. They're taking it seriously, he said. They're doing more than that, Hermione said. One of the communications, from a senior member called Griselda Marchbanks, specifically says the panel is concerned about the implications of suppressed precedent. She looked at Harry. She says the question of the Charter versus the 1901 Act may be one the Wisengamot has needed to answer for 70 years. She says, she looked at the parchment. She says it appears the right moment has finally arrived. Harry sat back. The castle was very warm around him. The portraits were awake in their frames, all of them, watching. He thought about the morning of this week, standing on the staircase with warmth running through his arms, the castle shuddering, the world rearranging itself around a decision that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with him. 5 days. 5 days of the most concentrated, exhausting, alive-feeling work he had ever done, and the thing he kept coming back to was not the legal victory or the political maneuvering or even the confrontation in the entrance hall this morning. It was Clara Okonkwo's face when she understood she was not a problem. 2 weeks, Harry said. 2 weeks, Hermione confirmed. He looked at the fire. He thought about Lucius Malfoy coming. He thought about the Wisengamot and the Charter and what Voss would need. He thought about the staff meeting on Monday and Carmichael's document and the accountability proposal and the shifting feeling in Slytherin House. He thought about what the castle had waited 1,000 years to build, and what 2 weeks were in the lifespan of a thing that had been patient since 993 AD. Right, he said. Let's get to work. Chapter 6, What Remains. The Wisengamot hearing was on a Thursday. Harry had been awake since 4. Not from anxiety, he had moved past anxiety somewhere around day 8 of this, the morning he'd stood in the corridor outside Snape's classroom and understood that the thing he was protecting was not his position but the school itself, and that understanding had settled something in him that didn't unsettle easily after. He was awake because the castle was awake. He could feel it in the walls, a heightened attention, a quality of gathered presence, the way a room full of people goes quiet before something important begins. He dressed, went to the window, and looked out at the grounds in the early gray light of a September morning that was doing nothing dramatic. No weather events. No owl storms. Just the lake flat and still and the forbidden forest standing in its permanent ancient patience and the Quidditch pitch empty and gold in the first light. 700 students sleeping behind him in the building. 2 weeks, compressed into the weight of a single Thursday. He turned from the window and went to the desk and read through Voss's final briefing document one more time, not because he had missed anything but because reading it again was the thing his hands needed to do while his mind did its own preparation. The document was 32 pages, dense and precise, and he had read it 4 times already, and every time he read it he found something new to appreciate about the way Voss built arguments, the way she never wasted a sentence, never placed an emphasis that wasn't earning its place. At 6 he heard footsteps on the spiral staircase and the door opened without a knock. Hermione. Coffee in one hand, 3 books under the other arm, wearing her robes already with her hair in the state that meant she had slept on it wrong and was refusing to acknowledge it. She set the coffee on the desk and the books beside it and sat down across from him and said, "How are you feeling?" "Ready," Harry said. She looked at him with that particular assessment. "Genuinely, or managing?" "Genuinely," he said. "The case is strong. Voss is extraordinary. The 1952 file has been authenticated 3 separate ways." He picked up the coffee. "If the Wisengamot rules against us, it won't be because the argument failed. It'll be because of politics, and if it's politics we deal with politics." He looked at her over the rim of the cup. "Stop doing the worried face." "I'm not doing a worried face," she said, "doing a worried face." "Hermione." She sat back. Exhaled. "I know it's strong. I know Voss is extraordinary. She stopped. Looked at the books she had brought. "I've been thinking about what comes after. And if we win," she said, "the charter is confirmed. The 1901 Act is subordinated. The ministry's governance authority over Hogwarts becomes formally limited. That's a massive institutional shift. Every magical school in Britain will watch what happens here. The precedent doesn't stay at Hogwarts." She met his eyes. "If you win this, Harry, you're changing something much larger than one school's governance." Harry looked at her. He had thought about this. He had thought about it the night he read the Castle's book, and the morning after the panel ruling, and in the quiet hours between other problems when the implications had space to develop. "I know," he said. "And you're all right with that?" "I think the ministry's authority over educational institutions needs to be limited," he said plainly. "Not ended. Limited. I think the 1901 Act was always an overreach, and the people who challenged it in 1923 and 1952 were right, and the ministry has used it to do harm that it called oversight." He set the cup down. "If this case changes that, then the castle chose the right moment as well as the right person." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "That was quite a speech." "I didn't mean it as a speech," he said. "I know," she said. "That's what made it one." She pulled the nearest book toward her. "I've been looking at the educational governance structures in France and Germany. Their equivalents of the 1901 Act were amended in 1934 and 1956 respectively, and the accountability models they replaced them with. Tell me over breakfast," Harry said. "Ron will want to hear too." "Ron will want to eat," she said. "He'll listen because I'll be talking." "That's how it usually works," Harry said, and she smiled the smile she saved for things that were genuinely funny without wanting to admit it. Ron appeared in the great hall at 7 looking unreasonably well-rested for someone who had been up until midnight cross-referencing Wisengamot voting records with Harry. He sat down, loaded his plate, and said, "Big day." "Big day," Harry agreed. "You're not nervous?" "Everyone keeps asking that." "Because it keeps being true in a way that is mildly unsettling," Ron said. He ate for a moment. Malfoy's father arrived last night. Harry looked up. How do you know? Draco told me, Ron said. Harry blinked. He told you. We've been, Ron made a gesture that encompassed some complicated recent development. Talking. A bit. Don't make it a thing. I'm not making it a thing, Harry said, making a mental note to absolutely never make it a thing. He's worried, Ron said. Draco is. His father came officially, some board reinstallation paperwork that apparently can't wait, which obviously means it can absolutely wait, and he's here for a different reason entirely. He looked at Harry. He wants to meet with you. Lucius Malfoy wants to meet with me, Harry said. According to Draco, yes. Harry thought about what Draco had told him 2 weeks ago. He wants to see what you are. And whether you can be managed. He thought about timing, the hearing today, Lucius arriving last night, the convergence of those two facts. He's here to read the result, Harry said. He wants to see how I handle the outcome, win or lose, and make his assessment based on that. He paused. Smart. Slytherin, Ron said, as though this explained everything, which it largely did. Tell Draco I'll meet with his father after the hearing, Harry said. Not before. He can wait. He reached for the toast. And Ron. Yeah. Thank you, Harry said. For the last 2 weeks. For everything. Ron looked at him across the breakfast table with the expression he wore when he was feeling something significant and had chosen honesty over deflection. You'd have done it for me, he said simply. I would, Harry said. And I'd do it again, Ron said, and picked up his fork. The Wizengamot chamber seated 213 members in its full configuration. Harry had seen it once before, a bad memory, the trial when he was 15, the way the stone seats had been arranged to make one person standing at the bottom feel very small. He was not at the bottom today. He was in the observation gallery above, connected through the castle's floor to a mirror that showed him the chamber clearly enough to read expressions. Voss was at the advocate's position. She had organized her files in the particular way she had, everything accessible without visible effort, and she was standing with her hands folded in front of her in a posture that Harry had come to understand meant she was doing her final preparatory thinking, quiet and gathered and completely ready. The ministry's advocate today was someone new, not the mid-level wizard from the panel hearing but a senior appointee named Hargreaves who wore the ministry's best robes and had the polished manner of someone who had been making institutional arguments for 30 years. He was good. Harry had read the briefing Voss had prepared on him and knew his tendencies, his rhetorical patterns, his established positions on questions of institutional governance. Hermione was next to Harry in the gallery with her notebook. Ron was on his other side. Behind them, McGonagall had arrived at 7:30 and taken a seat without announcement, in the manner of someone who intended to witness this and considered no explanation necessary. At 9 o'clock the chamber's chief warlock called the proceedings to order. Voss went first. She opened with the charter, the foundation document, its language, its scope, its explicit establishment of the castle's autonomous governance authority. She built the 993 precedent carefully and completely, and then she brought in the 1648 Ancient Institutions Act, and then she laid the timeline of the 1901 Education Act against the charter and showed, argument by argument, the places where the act operated within the charter's framework rather than above it. Then she introduced the 1952 case. The chamber was very still when she placed the castle's archival copy on the advocate's table and described its provenance and legal status. Harry watched the faces of the Wizengamot members, 213 people, a range of expressions from the deeply attentive to the cautiously skeptical to, in a handful of cases, something that looked like the controlled discomfort of people who had known this document existed and were not pleased to see it surface. Hargreaves objected to the document's provenance. Voss answered the objection with the Ancient Institutions Act citation and the 4 previous precedents she had assembled, cited by case number and date, and the objection was overruled. Hargreaves argued that the 1952 classification, though subsequently repealed, had been lawfully applied at the time. Voss agreed that it had been lawfully applied and then demonstrated, with a secondary document from the castle's archive, that the classification had been applied within 3 weeks of the challenge being filed, before any substantive hearing had taken place. The document was an internal ministry memo from 1952 that showed, in carefully bureaucratic language, that the classification had been applied specifically to prevent the hearing from proceeding. The chamber went quiet in a different way. The chief warlock looked at the memo. He looked at Hargreaves. "This document appears to indicate," he said, in the tone of someone choosing words carefully in public, that the 1952 classification was applied not as a matter of national security but as a matter of procedural convenience. Hargreaves's answer was thorough and professionally competent and did not quite address the question. Voss let him finish. Then she said, in the clear precise voice she used for the most important points, "The Waisengemot has never ruled on the question of whether the 1901 Education Act's authority over Hogwarts is consistent with the school's charter-established autonomy. It has not ruled because the only challenge ever mounted against that authority was suppressed before a hearing could be held. The question has been open for 73 years. She paused. This chamber has the opportunity to answer it today. Not to do something new, to finish something that was interrupted in 1952. From beside Harry, he heard McGonagall draw a breath. The Waisengemot voted to enter deliberations at 10:30. The gallery settled into the specific suspended quality of important waiting, the kind where conversation feels wrong. Ron leaned over after 20 minutes and said very quietly, "She's brilliant." "Yes," Harry said. "I mean genuinely exceptional," he said. "Hermione's in a state." Harry glanced at Hermione. She was sitting with her notebook closed and her hands folded and her eyes fixed on the chamber floor with the expression of someone who has been so impressed by what they've witnessed that they've passed through enthusiasm into something quieter and more permanent. "I know," Harry said. They waited. The deliberations took 1 hour and 40 minutes. When the chamber reconvened, the chief warlock stood and read the ruling in the measured, careful language of an institution that understood it was creating permanent record. The ruling was, in summary, the Hogwarts Foundation Charter of 993 AD established the castle's autonomous governance authority as primary and foundational. The Education Act of 1901, as a piece of statutory legislation, operated within that framework rather than above it. Any provision of the Act that purported to override the castle's autonomous governance decisions was unenforceable against the Charter. The Ministry of Magic retained educational oversight authority, standard inspection, curriculum standards, teacher qualification requirements, but not governance authority. The question of the castle's headmaster authority was a matter of the castle's internal constitution, not ministry jurisdiction. Emergency Education Order 7-2 was formally struck down. The gallery was quiet for a moment after the chief warlock finished reading. Then several things happened simultaneously. Voss turned to the mirror and gave Harry a single nod that contained everything. Hargreaves was writing with the mechanical focus of someone who has already moved to the next strategic calculation, and 2 rows back in the chamber, Harry could see 3 Waisengemot members with the specific expression of people who had voted against and were recalibrating their political futures. Ron made a sound that was almost silent but was unmistakably celebratory. McGonagall said nothing. She stood up, smoothed her robes, and said to Harry, "We should return to the school." Her voice was completely steady. Her eyes were not. They came back through the castle's flue and into the headmaster's office, and by the time Harry stepped out of the fireplace and turned around, the portraits were all awake. Every single one of them. Helewise was standing in her frame rather than sitting, which Harry had never seen before. She looked at Harry with the expression that had first appeared the morning the castle made its choice, that smile that belongs to someone watching something they've waited a very long time for. She said nothing. She simply nodded once, deeply, the way you nod to mark something permanent. Several of the other headmasters and headmistresses were making sounds, not applause exactly, more like the collective exhale of people who have been watching a very long game reach its conclusion. One elderly wizard near the bottom row was crying with the uncomplicated openness of someone who has stopped caring about dignity. Hermione went immediately to the side table and opened her notebook and began writing, which was how she processed significant events, through documentation, through the act of making them real in her own hand. Ron sat in the visitor's chair, looked at the ceiling, and said, "Right. We won." "We won," Harry said. "The Ministry can't override the castle's governance anymore. Within the defined parameters, no." "And Ron sat up and looked at him. "How are you?" Harry thought about this honestly. He was standing in the office he had occupied for 2.5 weeks, behind a desk that had become his through use and daily reality rather than ceremony, in a castle that was warm around him with a warmth he recognized now the way you recognize your own heartbeat, background, constant, the condition of everything else. He thought about the last 2 weeks, the Ministry officials, the archive, Voss arguing before 213 people with a file the castle had kept for 73 years against exactly this moment. He thought about Clara Okonkwo's face and Draco Malfoy choosing and Umbridge asking whether the students would be safer and Dumbledore saying "I will try." "I'm good," he said, and meant it specifically. Lucius Malfoy was waiting in the entrance hall. Not performing patience, he had the kind of patience that was structural, built into his posture and expression over decades of navigating positions of power. He was wearing impeccable robes of gray and silver and holding his cane with the easy familiarity of someone who had carried it so long it was less accessory than extension, and he watched Harry come down the stairs with the careful assessment Harry had been expecting. Behind Harry, Ron had gone left at the top of the stairs toward the common room without being asked, which was the specific competence of someone who understood when presence was useful and when it was noise. Harry was alone on the stairs. He came down and stopped at the bottom and looked at Lucius Malfoy. There was no performing of anything on Harry's end. No aggression, no warmth, no particular signal. He just looked at the man with the level attention of someone who had read enough of the archive and enough of the world to understand what was in front of him. Malfoy looked back. And Harry saw in that careful assessment the thing Draco had described, the evaluation, the calculation. Can he be managed? He watched Lucius Malfoy arrive at his answer. "Headmaster," Malfoy said. He said it without irony, which was the most telling thing about the moment. "Mr. Malfoy," Harry said. "I understand you're here about board reinstatement." "Among other things," Malfoy said. "The board application process goes through Professor McGonagall," Harry said. "She manages the administrative intake. I'm happy to discuss the reinstatement in principle. The board is more functional with full membership." He paused. "But I want to be clear about the terms." "Terms," Malfoy said. "The board's role, following today's ruling, is accountability oversight," Harry said. "Not governance. Not curriculum control. Not a mechanism for importing external political agendas into this school." He held Malfoy's eyes. "Any board member who uses their position for those purposes will find it very short-lived." Malfoy was quiet for a moment. The cane turned slightly in his hand. "You're telling me," he said, "that you'll remove me if I step out of line." "I'm telling you the terms clearly so there's no ambiguity later," Harry said. "You're a clear thinker, Mr. Malfoy. You appreciate precision." Something moved in Malfoy's face, not the practiced social expressions Harry had seen in public and in court proceedings and across the trial testimony he'd read in the archive. Something that was, briefly, genuine. An acknowledgement. Not respect, not exactly, but something in that territory. "Draco," Malfoy said, "just the name," flatly. "Is well," Harry said. "He's been making good choices." Malfoy looked at him. "Has he?" "Yes," Harry said. "The kind that are his own." Another silence. The entrance hall was quiet around them, the torches burning their steady gold, the stone floor worn smooth by 1,000 years of feet. Then Lucius Malfoy said, with the specific economy of a man who never uses words he doesn't intend, "I'll speak with Professor McGonagall." He walked toward the corridor, cane's sound measured and precise on the stone. At the far end he paused, just briefly, without turning around. Then he continued. Harry stood alone in the entrance hall for a moment. Then he went back upstairs. The conversation with Dumbledore happened that evening. Not in the headmaster's office, by some unspoken mutual understanding, they met in the Transfiguration classroom, which was where it had always been easiest to talk honestly, maybe because it was not a room of authority. Just a room of work. Dumbledore was sitting at the front of the room, not behind the desk but in a student chair, facing another student chair, and this configuration, the absence of any elevated position, was so deliberate that Harry felt it as a statement the moment he came in. He sat in the other chair. They were quiet for a moment in the way they had gotten quiet together over the last 2 weeks, not the charged silence of earlier in Harry's life, when Dumbledore's pauses had felt weighted with management, but something more honest, the silence of two people who have said difficult things to each other and survived. The ruling, Dumbledore said. Yes, Harry said. Voss was extraordinary. She was. You found her through me, Dumbledore said. And used her better than I would have. Harry looked at him. You knew the 1952 case could be used this way, he said. You knew the castle's archive was admissible under the Ancient Institutions Act. If you had used it, years ago, during the first Umbridge situation, or earlier, yes, Dumbledore said. Why didn't you? Dumbledore looked at his hands. The blackened one had spread slightly over the past 2 weeks, the curse's progress quiet and inevitable. He looked at it without flinching. Because I believed, he said, that the Ministry's cooperation was essential for what I was trying to do. Fighting Voldemort. Maintaining the order of things. I needed the Ministry functional, even when it was wrong. A direct legal challenge to its authority over Hogwarts would have fractured a relationship I thought I needed intact. He paused. I chose institutional stability over institutional justice. And was it worth it? Harry asked. No, Dumbledore said. Simply. The Ministry's cooperation was conditional and selective and ultimately didn't hold when I needed it most. I chose the wrong calculation. He looked at Harry. You chose differently. You chose the right argument over the convenient one, and the school is better for it. Harry was quiet for a moment. I need to tell you something, he said. About the archive. Dumbledore waited. I read your letters from 1981, Harry said. And the files about the students you managed. The boy in the 70s, and others. He held Dumbledore's gaze. I've thought about this for 2 weeks. And I've decided I'm not going to use those records against you. Not publicly, not politically. They stay in the archive. Dumbledore said nothing. Not because you don't owe people answers, Harry said. You do. Some of those people may seek them and you should give them honestly. He paused. But I'm not going to weaponize your history to consolidate my position. That's not what the archive is for. It's not what the castle is for. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. And what moved through his expression was something Harry had not seen in 5 years of knowing him, not wisdom, not calculation, not the managed warmth of a man performing guidance. Just something very old and very tired and very grateful, a feeling stripped down to its simplest form. You are, Dumbledore said quietly, a better person than I have been. I've had a better example of what not to do, Harry said. He said it without cruelty, just the flat honesty of a true thing said plainly. Dumbledore's mouth moved into something that was, genuinely, a smile. Fair, he said. They sat in the quiet classroom. Outside the windows the September evening was doing something soft and golden, the last good warmth of the season before autumn settled in properly, and the light lay across the floor between them in long strips. What will you do? Harry asked. Going forward. Teach, Dumbledore said, without hesitation. Which is what I should have been doing more of and managing less of for the past 30 years. He looked at his hands again. And address some debts that are long overdue. A pause. There are people I have, affected, who deserve honest conversations. I intend to have them. Harry nodded. "And you," Dumbledore said. "What will you do with this?" He gestured. The school, the authority, the whole complicated unprecedented thing. Harry had been handed by a castle that had waited 1,000 years to hand it to someone. Harry thought about it honestly. "Keep it running," he said. "Get the accountability structure in place. The board, the student council, the public reporting." He paused. "Make sure Clara Okonkwo doesn't get cornered in corridors anymore. Make sure every student in this building knows it's safe for them to become who they actually are." He looked at Dumbledore. "That's it. That's the whole plan." Dumbledore looked at him with the specific expression of someone seeing something clearly for the first time that they should have seen years ago. "That," he said, "is exactly right." 3 things happened in the week that followed the ruling that Harry would remember for a long time. The first, the student council met for the first time. Harry had proposed it and McGonagall had organized it, and it had come together faster than either of them expected, partly because the students themselves had been waiting for something like it without knowing they were waiting. 2 representatives from each house, elected by their peers, meeting in a room the castle offered on the 3rd floor that turned out to be warm and well lit and arranged with chairs in a circle. Harry attended the first meeting as an observer and did not speak unless spoken to, and what he watched was 17 students figuring out how to make something real, and it was messy and argumentative and occasionally brilliant, and one Hufflepuff second year said something about the library's opening hours that turned out to be a genuinely important equity issue that Harry hadn't known about, and he took note of it and fixed it within the week. The second, Umbridge stayed for 10 days after the ruling. She did not attend classes or interfere with the school's operation. She walked the corridors, she ate in the Great Hall, she had several long conversations with McGonagall that McGonagall reported as productive. She submitted a formal note to the ministry identifying several elements of educational oversight practice she recommended be revised, including the prohibition on certain defensive magic being taught to students under 16, which she described in the note as demonstrably counterproductive in light of recent events. She left on a Thursday morning without ceremony and gave Harry a single piece of parchment on her way out, a 3-page response to the accountability proposal, annotated with detailed professional suggestions that Hermione would later describe as genuinely useful, which is very annoying. Harry read it carefully and kept it. The third, Snape came to the headmaster's office on a Tuesday evening, set a folder on the desk, sat in the visitor's chair, and said, without preamble, the defense position. Harry looked at him. "What about it?" "Carmichael is leaving at Christmas," Snape said. "His contract was always temporary. The permanent replacement has not been identified." He looked at the folder. "I have taught defense against the dark arts privately for 15 years. My professional qualifications exceed any candidate you are likely to find at short notice. And," he stopped for a moment in the manner of someone crossing a threshold they had been standing at for some time. "And I believe I would be effective at it in a way I have not been effective at potions, which I teach well but without the engagement I would have teaching defense." Harry looked at him. He thought about what it cost Snape to say that, to name what he wanted, to admit to wanting it, to sit in front of a student he had spent 6 years tormenting with his indifference and ask for something. "The potions position," Harry said. "Slughorn has expressed willingness to return," Snape said. "I spoke with him last week. He finds retirement unsatisfying." Harry looked at the folder. He looked at Snape. He thought about the morning in the dungeons when he had asked Snape to choose to stay, not because of Dumbledore's orders but because of his own decision, and the quality of the answer Snape had given. "Yes," Harry said. Snape's expression did not change. But he picked up the folder and stood, and there was something in the way he moved toward the door, something different in its quality from how he'd moved in that first conversation, that suggested a weight had been put down somewhere. "Severus," Harry said. Snape stopped. "You've been doing important work here for a long time," Harry said. "Quiet work. Dangerous work. Work that most people didn't know about and some of them still don't." He paused. "I know about it. I want you to know that I know." Snape was still for a moment. That is, he said, and stopped. Tried again. Thank you. 2 words, carefully said, carrying more than 2 words usually carry. He left. On a Friday evening 3 weeks after the Wiesengemot ruling, Harry was walking the castle. He did this sometimes now, not for any purpose, not following a problem or heading toward a meeting, just walking. The castle offered itself differently when he walked without intent, corridors that arranged themselves in unexpected sequences, rooms that opened onto each other in ways that didn't match the architecture he knew from 6 years as a student, windows that showed aspects of the grounds he hadn't noticed before. He had come to think of it as the castle talking, not with urgency, not with direction, just talking, the way places talk to people who are paying attention. He was on the 6th floor, walking the long corridor that ran along the castle's western face, when he heard footsteps behind him and turned. Draco Malfoy. Not lurking, not performing, just walking, slightly behind, hands in his robe pockets, wearing the expression he'd been wearing for the past 3 weeks that was the absence of the armor that had been his primary public characteristic since age 11. You walk at night, Draco said. Sometimes, Harry said, not stopping. Draco fell into step beside him. They walked in silence for a moment, a silence that was genuinely comfortable in a way that neither of them would have found believable a month ago. My father, Draco said eventually. His board application. It's been accepted, Harry said. McGonagall told you. This afternoon. He was quiet for a moment. He came home different. After the hearing. After talking to you. He paused. Not reformed. Don't misread me. He's still my father. But something shifted in what he's calculating. He frowned slightly, working it out. I think he's decided you're the power worth aligning with. That's a very Slytherin way to describe it, Harry said. I am a Slytherin, Draco said, without defensiveness. I know, Harry said. It's one of the things the castle was paying attention to. The houses don't define people the way we've been using them to. But they say something real about how people think, if you don't turn it into a hierarchy. He glanced at Draco. Your father calculating power is not the same thing as him choosing right over wrong. But it might get him to the same place occasionally. Draco was quiet for a moment. That's a very optimistic interpretation. I'm working with what's available, Harry said. They walked to the end of the corridor and turned, and the castle arranged a staircase where Harry needed one and they went up toward the 7th floor in comfortable near silence. At the top, Draco said, why did you let me in? Really? 3 weeks ago. When I came and said I didn't want to report back to my father. You could have told me to prove it first, or waited, or, you just said come back tomorrow. Harry thought about this. Because you'd already proven it, he said. You'd been standing in a middle space for a long time, waiting for a side to be worth choosing. The moment I had something to offer that was real, not just opposition to your father, not just the ministry's version of authority, but an actual alternative, you moved immediately. He looked at Draco. That's not cowardice. That's someone who needed the right conditions. Draco was quiet for a moment. That's possibly the most generous interpretation of my entire personality. The castle's interpretation, Harry said. I found your file in the archive. There's a file on me. There's a file on everyone, Harry said. Yours says, actually, I'm not going to tell you what it says. Read it yourself sometime. The room of requirement is open to students now. The archive is accessible. He looked ahead. It says something true. The last conversation happened with Hermione and Ron the night before the first full month ended. They were in the headmaster's office, which had become, over the past month, less the headmaster's office in the formal sense and more simply where the 3 of them ended up when the day was over and they needed to sit in the same room without agenda. Hermione was reading. Ron was doing something with a chess set. Harry was at the desk with nothing particular in front of him. Do you think about what happens next year? Ron asked. Harry looked at him. What do you mean? When we, he gestured. Graduate. Leave. The castles chose you, but you're still technically a student. Eventually you finish the school year and, what? Harry had thought about this more than once. I stay, he said. Ron looked at him. You stay. I don't stop being headmaster when the school year ends, Harry said. The castle's choice isn't time-limited. If I decide to leave, that's different. But I'm not leaving. He paused. I'm not done. What about, Hermione looked up from her book. Your newts. There's a world outside this castle, Harry. I know, he said. I'll do the newts. There's a world and I'll be in it. But this is, he stopped, looking for the right word. This is mine. Not in the possessive way. In the, I belong here, and the school belongs to everyone in it, and those two things are compatible. He looked at them. You don't have to stay. I wasn't planning to leave, Hermione said, returning to her book. Neither was I, Ron said, moving a piece. Harry looked at them both, at the particular quality of their presence in this room, the way they filled it with the comfortable reality of people who had been through things together and come out on the right side of them. He thought about what he would have done without them over the past month, and the answer was a simplified and worse version of everything. Thank you, he said. Stop thanking us, Ron said. It's becoming a thing. It's not a thing, Harry said. It's definitely a thing, Hermione said, without looking up. Harry looked at the fire. The castle was warm around them in its permanent way, that deep patient warmth that had been there since the first morning on the staircase, since the torches went gold and the building shuddered with something like recognition. Outside the window the October night had come in properly, the first real cold of autumn pressing against the glass, and the grounds were dark except for the moonlight on the lake and the distant lights of Hagrid's hut. He thought about Clara Okonkwo's dormitory with its warm window seat. He thought about Neville in the greenhouse with his careful hands and his honest attention. He thought about Snape's two-word thank you and McGonagall's not-quite laugh in the corridor. He thought about Dumbledore in the student chair and Umbridge on the moonlit path and Voss at the advocates' table and Marchbanks reading a ruling that resolved a question open since 1952. He thought about the castle's book. The school begins. The school will remember. It would remember this month. He knew that. The archive would hold it, the way it held everything, every decision, every letter, every moment where someone had chosen right over expedient or person over position. The castle was patient and permanent and it remembered, and what it would remember about this particular autumn was not a legal ruling or a political victory or a 17-year-old sitting in a headmaster's chair. It would remember a school that had become, again, the thing it was built to be. The fire crackled. The portrait slept. Ron made a move, frowned at the board, took it back. Hermione turned a page. The castle breathed its slow stone breath around all of them, 700 people held in its warmth, and Harry Potter sat at the center of it and felt, clearly and simply and without the noise of anxiety or ambition or anyone else's plans, exactly where he was supposed to be,